Chapter 660. The Mist Alliance was foundationally different from the other mega-empires. The Mist Alliance wasn't an independent country. It was an alliance made up of the various Northlands countries. The 7 Northlands countries that human society viewed as border barbarians were the geographical core of the Mist Alliance. The non-human species also made up a large portion of the Mist Alliance. As the underground, Shilua undead, Northlands beastmen, and Northlands elves joined the Mist Alliance, the balance of power in the Mist Alliance naturally changed. The human countries weren't the only core of the Mist Alliance. The reason why the Mist Alliance was able to maintain itself was the fact that the people of the Mist were located in Sluweir and Donglan Principality. These 2 countries were faintly viewed as a new Mist Kingdom, and they were the political core of the Mist Alliance. 5 of the 7 Northlands countries were also human kingdoms like the Mist Kingdom. This was a natural alliance. The Mist Kingdom had defeated and conquered the Northlands beastmen. The undead, the underground, and the Northlands elves were all connected to the Mist Kingdom in countless ways. Due to many factors, Renee and Gleena had become the true leaders of the Mist Alliance. Not interfering with each other's internal affairs was the foundation of the Mist Alliance. Ever since the Mist Alliance was established, it had been a rather loose alliance that would work together in times of crisis. This was the Mist Alliance's definition of itself. However, with the strengthening of communication and the entire world entering a period of war, in order to prepare for war, various resources and powers would need to be consolidated in order to make the most of the scarce resources available. And once the consolidation began, the independence of the various countries within the alliance would naturally be greatly reduced. This was why it was so easy for autocratic governments to appear in times of war. In order to deal with the threat of war, an efficient organization with centralized power would be necessary. Then, with the appearance of an autocrat and centralized power, the factions of the Mist Alliance would swiftly lose their right to speak and protest. The Northlands Wintergrain Reserve Committee. This was a very obvious name for this committee's function. It was also quite old-fashioned, as it sounded just like a government that didn't have any money. But actually, even a country's king would maintain sufficient respect for the committee members. The Mist Alliance's main responsibility was to manage winter rations in order to prevent large-scale starvation and drought. This was because the Mist Alliance could manage the entire Northlands country's food supplies. It could also redistribute food imported from other countries within the Mist Alliance. It could also selectively turn a country's food into war reserves. This type of authority had long since become the Mist Alliance's ally. If this didn't count as interfering with other countries' internal affairs, then what would? The Northlands Defense Frontline Construction Headquarters was in charge of the Northlands strategic defenses, fortresses, and defensive line construction. That meant that they were in charge of the construction of defensive fortifications. Wasn't building a fortress in your territory considered interfering with the internal affairs of the Northlands? Didn't the various countries' royalty have any qualms about that? But right now, this was absolutely necessary. Everyone knew that a major battle was about to break out. If the Mist Alliance was still like a pile of loose sand, then it would be necessary for the Mist Alliance to exist. Although the Mist Alliance as a whole had been developing over the past few years, the one that had developed the fastest was naturally the Mist Kingdom, which had Definder and a magic engineering headquarters. When these 2 Mist Kingdoms joined forces, the Mist Alliance would truly be the #1 human country in the Mist Alliance. In fact, even the other 5 Northlands countries combined wouldn't be able to compare to these 2 countries. Due to the Mist Kingdom's dominance in the Mist Alliance, it was needless to say who was in charge of these working committee, command, and headquarters. As more and more preparations were made for the upcoming war, the entire Mist Alliance's member countries were being consolidated. The new Borealis airship fleet, which was constructed with the combined efforts of various countries, was the most obvious example. It would probably take several decades for a single country's resources to produce such a powerful airship. But now, in just a short 8 years, not only did the first airship fleet take shape, the various countries' armaments, industries, and shipbuilding foundations had also improved. As long as their resources kept up, the second airship fleet would likely be completed soon. From a certain standpoint, as the preparations for the upcoming war continued, more and more rules were created and more working committees gained actual power. The Mist Alliance's member countries' independence was rapidly decreasing. Kings were reduced to domain lords that had to listen to orders from their superiors, while domain lords were restricted by the Church of Law and the Mist Alliance's organizations. They were becoming more and more like administrative and military officials. While the entire Mist Alliance was thriving, there would naturally be people who were dissatisfied because their interests were being harmed. Where there was light, there would also be darkness. Struggles for power would always be present wherever there were people. The Mist Alliance, which was born from ideals, was no exception. There was no need to mention the process, but when it came to scheming, very few people would be able to defeat the Dark Elves. And now, the entire Dark Elf Society was indirectly working for the Mist Kingdom. The final result was that all those who opposed the Mist Kingdom disappeared due to various reasons. Were there people dissatisfied? Of course there were. But as the Hades gods and the Mist Alliance's rise brought all sorts of benefits, such as abundant resources, higher status as citizens, increased income, and more job opportunities, most people now understood the situation and were content to continue working on this new airship. I don't care who's in charge. As long as my life keeps getting better, that's enough. This was what the great majority of people thought. And in this aspect, the Mist Kingdom had indeed fulfilled its promise. Of course, not everyone was happy to see such a development. At the very least, the kings and domain lords who were losing control of the situation were faintly beginning to oppose the Mist Kingdom. The greatest difference between the Mist Alliance and other systems was that the Church of Law's overseers would constantly investigate the actions of the nobles and royalty. Meanwhile, the Mist Kingdom was a powerful supporter of the Church of Law. This was naturally unacceptable to the old-fashioned nobles who were used to being more powerful than the world itself. And for some people, touching their power was the same as touching their lives. The old-fashioned nobles were also experts at scheming. They were even related to the countries in the center of the continent through bloodlines and benefits. If it wasn't for the fact that the shadows acted swiftly, and if it wasn't for the fact that the major countries were afraid of the Mist Kingdom's power, the alliances would have been on the verge of collapse at least 4 or 5 times already. And as the Mist Kingdom's status became more and more stable in the Mist Kingdom's infighting, the other allied countries' royal authority was visibly declining. This was basically an open secret. The Mist Kingdom, the undead of Shiloh, and the underground were the core of the Mist Alliance. Their overwhelming power caused all rebellions and conspiracies to become useless. Since there was a core, there would naturally be a periphery. The end result was that the original old-fashioned nobles factions were obviously marginalized. The Mist Kingdom's factions also repeatedly spread the word that these organizations that strengthened the Mist Alliance's resources would only be temporary, and that they would all be canceled after the Holy War. However, not only did the kings and domain lords who represented the old-fashioned nobles not take this seriously, even the propagandists themselves were just saying it. Will they ever let go of power that they've already obtained? They would. After the Holy War was over, I would immediately find a place to retire. What use would I have for such useless things? What fun could there be in being a rich landlord from a feudal era? I would rather travel around the world and enjoy the sights. But this time I was telling the truth. Yet, as always, nobody believed me. Did the kings and domain lords who joined the Mist Alliance regret it? I felt that most of them regretted it now. After all, many things that they could do as they pleased in the past were now impossible to do. The inflexible creatures from the Church of Law were truly evil and should be executed. But as the Holy War progressed, reality would prove that their original choice was correct, and their views would change. But at this time, joining the Mist Alliance would mean giving up on royal authority. This was an incredibly taboo in this era of royalty. The Sohn Dukedom and Feldis Kingdom are applying to join the Mist Alliance? When did this happen? Why are they doing this? I wasn't the only one who was surprised. All the administrative staff were astonished to hear this. After all, perhaps joining the Mist Alliance would be beneficial for the entire country and its citizens, but only the dukes and kings of the two countries would make such a decision. Would they be willing to give up their royal authority and voluntarily accept being bound? The Sohn dukedom and Feldis kingdom were both located to the south of the former 7 Northlands countries. There was also a small country in between them. The Sohn dukedom could only be considered a small country, but the Feldis kingdom occupied the fertile Finn plains and the Cheryl River. Its territory was also quite large, and it was quite powerful. This application to join the Mist Alliance was obviously rather sudden. The application arrived 3 days ago. It was signed by Grand Duke Klein and His Majesty Vincent. The application includes basic information on both countries, as well as basic information on taxes, expenditures, military, and so on. The administrative staff believes that the two countries are quite sincere and that we must seriously consider their application. Renee numbly flipped through the information in front of me. She had a bitter, yet serious expression. It seemed that she wouldn't be able to sleep tonight since she had just returned. No matter whether or not the two countries' application was accepted, this was a major matter that would affect the Mist Alliance's development for the next 100 years. If they accepted, not only would the Mist Alliance's territory increase by 1/3, it would also open up a path to the mainland, and they would even obtain a fertile land that could produce crops. And if they didn't accept, they would at least have to give a sufficient reason. I casually flipped through the map and looked at the large patches of brown and blue on the map, comparing them to my past memories. At times like this, my past memories were probably even more useful than the inflexible information. The Sohn dukedom had only been established 2 generations ago. It was a small country that had been established within the ruins of the Mist Alliance. There were only a few cities within the country, and they didn't have any particularly famous specialties. They could only be considered a vassal of the Feldis kingdom. What ruins? The ruins of the Yongye calamity. I meant that these two countries were somewhat related to me, although there were plenty of countries in the world that I was related to. It couldn't be helped. Back then, the Mist Kingdom was located in the far north. If I wanted to take revenge on the Holy Church, I would definitely have to pass through these countries if I headed south. It was likely that they had been conveniently destroyed back then. I remember now. Feldis and I have no grudge against each other. Back then, the Yongye army passed through him. Yep, he had a grudge against Cavendish. Back then, the demon army crippled him, and even the king was killed. The current royal family was moved here from an inland kingdom. I was rendered speechless. What was this? Did we completely offend all the neighboring countries back then? If you're talking about the truth, you're right. How many grudges did the demon army and the undead army invade the south? Why do you think so many assassins have appeared in the past few days? You should be grateful that humans are short-lived species, and these lords and kings are purely political animals. They won't fight you to the death for the blood grudges of their ancestors that have long been forgotten. If it were a long-lived species, even if their leader doesn't care about the grudges of the past, the citizens will still force him to fight you to the death. The silly cat was showing off the advantages of being a long-lived species in front of me, but I was retorting in my heart, aren't your elves still obedient? In this day and age, it's still more practical to have a bigger fist. Of course, I wouldn't say it out loud. After all, the silly cat would easily jump up in anger when it came to the pride of the elves, and I still needed her protection right now. Also, the rise of the two major mist kingdoms is the equivalent of forcefully digging out 2 pieces of land from nothing. In the past, it wasn't the 7 Northlands kingdoms, but the 9 Northlands kingdoms. What do you think happened in between? You can ask Renee how her ancestor valiantly fought against 3 mist kingdoms by himself. Actually, I didn't pay much attention to the past. The other side of being short-lived was that I sighed about how short my life was. I couldn't stop myself from having fun while I could. Expanding my territory and becoming the strongest emperor in history was probably the dream of many kings. The end result was that the human nobles and royalty were all terrible people. Many of them were related by blood, and many of them had fought each other to the death. The past wasn't important at all. Only when it was necessary would people use the past as a reason to declare war. For example, your grandfather killed my uncle and stole my second grandmother. If you don't give the Empress to me as my concubine, I'll declare war against you. Who would care about such things normally? Short-lived species, it's enough to live in the present. Living in the present is even more exciting. I ignored the silly cat's arrogant expression and focused on the information I had. At the very least, based on the current information, I would reject this request to join the Mist Alliance. That's right, I would reject it. I wouldn't allow two countries to join and make the Mist Alliance even stronger. It wasn't always better to have a larger country. At the very least, the Holy War had just broken out. I did some simple calculations. Once two countries joined, our defensive borders would greatly increase, and we would lose many natural strongholds and fortresses. Our original solid defense would naturally become weak. And if I completely ignored the two countries' defenses, the Mist Alliance was an alliance of military defense to begin with. If I gave up on helping the two countries join, that would mean that both the Alliance's rules and the Mist Alliance's morale would collapse. Let's gather information first. At the very least, we need to know why they chose to join the Mist Alliance. I felt a headache coming on as I rubbed my forehead and put down the scrolls. Meanwhile, my servants kept bringing me all sorts of books and information. History, culture, financial income, military information, the movements of important people in the country, the real reason why they joined the Mist Alliance. It seems that the intelligence department is going to be exhausted, right? I also need to consider the effect that joining the Mist Alliance will have on the entire Holy War's defense system. It seems that the strategy department is going to lose sleep over this. There's also the foreign affairs and administration departments. I shook my head and sighed in frustration. I kept thinking as I walked. The moment I reached the door, I discovered that it was already blocked. The servants were all smiles, but they weren't willing to step aside. Don't even think about escaping. Don't even think about skipping work. Let's all work overtime until we die. Behind me were Renee's resentful words. My escape plan had been seen through yet again. Chapter 661. Year FT8, December 27th. There were only 3 days left. HE had 30 days per month. The old year was about to end, and the new year was about to begin. In this world, there was no such thing as a solar calendar or lunar calendar. The New Year's celebration in 3 days would be the grandest celebration of a year. As snowflakes fell, everyone's footsteps became more and more hurried. However, most people had joyful expressions of satisfaction and expectation. Many brightly colored banners and advertising slogans had appeared on the shops along the streets, and the streets were filled with a joyous atmosphere. And as living standards continuously improved, there would be a tremendous amount of job opportunities brought about by prosperity and development. For Definder's residents, as long as they didn't stay at home to wait for assistance, their lives would naturally become better and better. This trend of constantly improving one's life was even more valuable than having an abundant lifestyle. This trend of constantly improving one's life filled everyone with hope for the future. They would work as hard as they could for a better future for themselves. They were also filled with gratitude towards the Mist Kingdom's royalty who had given them such a lifestyle. Every year, this would be the busiest time for the Mist Kingdom's administrative department and royalty. Not only would there be a large amount of work to deal with during the year, there would also be the preparation of winter rations and winter hunts. These were all major events that concerned the country's survival. Also, meeting with representatives from all over the world and participating in all sorts of activities was also a requirement to stabilize the country's morale. The royal family's main doors were wide open, and there was an endless stream of carriages coming and going. The guest hall was currently hosting an end-of-year reception and a banquet. Groups of representatives came and went, and as the host, Renee was smiling so much that she had cramps after smiling for more than 5 hours straight. However, the guests didn't care about such things. They excitedly waved at the friendly queen and kissed her fingertips. In the eyes of the citizens, the night princess from back then was now a true queen. Being able to see that the queen and her concubines were in good health meant that the Mist Kingdom would develop more steadily in the coming year. The only worry was that the queen's personal hobbies would have a side effect. What if the royalty has no descendants? if something happens to Her Majesty Renee. Speaking of which, it was rather laughable. Back when the Mist Kingdom had been in decline, nobody had cared about this problem. But now, as the power of the country continued to rise, a dangerous fact was placed before everyone. There was no one left to continue the royal family. There is no need to mention how important a successor with a stable position was to a kingdom. Although East Mist was still a dukedom in name, be it in terms of size or influence, it was definitely an empire. The advantage of a centralized authority was that it was highly efficient, but the disadvantage was that if something happened to the person in charge and the successor didn't manage to keep up, the entire empire would collapse. And it just so happened that this Night Princess had probably been raised as a boy since she was young. Even some of her sexual orientations were too masculine, which eventually led to a deviation. These were just small matters. The citizens wouldn't be dissatisfied with Her Majesty Renee because of this. On the contrary, the fun of the streets and alleys made her more approachable to the people. However, this small hobby directly caused the queen to be married for many years and still have no children. Of course, if her imperial concubine were to get pregnant, the first people who would be dissatisfied would be this group of gossip-loving citizens. However, after so many years, Rain was still the only one in the royal family. This made people a little anxious. If the Mist Kingdom's royal family still had a branch bloodline, they could think of a way to find a nephew to take over. But with the current situation, if Her Highness Renee didn't have any descendants, she would eventually grow old, even if nothing unexpected happened. Once the throne was empty, it would be strange if the rulers under her didn't make a huge fuss. As for adopting children from other countries, the people of the Mist were quite serious about this. It had to be this bloodline. They still remembered the Mist War flag and the previous kings who had protected them and their country. Before the Mist Kingdom lost its honor, they wouldn't accept any other bloodline. And so, scenes that made Renee the most embarrassed kept happening. After the representatives said a series of congratulatory words for the new year, they would always talk about their sons and grandsons in a roundabout way, almost directly saying things like, "You should hurry up and find someone to give birth to a son," which would be incredibly rude. Meanwhile, the major nobles and leaders of the Mist Kingdom would directly introduce their nephews' and grandsons' achievements and experiences. Starting from 3 years ago, this was already the end of every year for Renee. According to the average marriage age in Ike, there were quite a few people who got married at the age of 14. Renee, who is currently 22 or 23, should indeed be the mother of 2 or 3 children. After forcing her to get married, she's forcing her to give birth to a child? She's such a pitiful queen. Do you even have a right to say such a thing? You still have the face to say such a thing? The silly cat was quite happy that she was bound to my equipment, but I felt like there was more to her words. What does that have to do with me? Isn't this all Cavendish is doing? Cavendish? Have you forgotten who Renee's nominal guardian knight is? Guardian knight? In other words, a noble lady's lover knight would be more appropriate. Did Renee even have a guardian knight? Back when she was still in the Ottoman Empire, she seemed to have found a female guardian knight for her. That was also when the rumors about Renee being a lily began. Who? Oh, there's a time machine over there. Doryman, it's time to go on an adventure to the dinosaur era. I finally recalled. Back then, in order to interfere with the Mist Kingdom's internal affairs as the Mist Kingdom's rightful ruler, as well as to stop those ridiculous rumors, I was indeed Renee's nominal guardian knight, which meant that I was Renee's personal knight. I finally understood what all those angry and complaining gazes meant. I should hurry up and find a time machine. At this moment, I no longer had any interest in watching the fun. While it was fun to watch the fun, it was quite troublesome to watch the fun and get involved. You finally remembered, haven't you? Yonya's woman. Do you really think that ordinary people will dare to pursue her just because of her title? It's all your fault that she can't get married. Nonsense, it's obviously Cavendish's fault. If he didn't use Renee's body to drink with prostitutes, wouldn't that have caused all those rumors? All right, let's fix this. It's the fault of you two shameless brothers. How do you intend to make up for the fact that you guys are specialized in making up for your granddaughters? Everyone else's entire lives will be ruined because of you two brothers. I hesitated for a moment and finally gave up on the idea of finding a time machine. I'd rather go look for a dimensional door. In the past, the New Year's greetings would end very quickly. But this year, the situation was slightly different. It seemed that none of the guests wanted to leave. In the eyes of the guests, a familiar figure who was sitting at a table and reading a book was quite shocking. That person? Is it him? Has he finally returned? I was wondering why the bounty was canceled. So it turns out that Her Majesty Rene finally found him. Should stop talking. Be careful that he doesn't run away again. These tall and burly men were all quite loud. Of course I could hear them, since we were in the same hall. I didn't even know what to say after hearing their words that made me feel helpless. Run away? Bounty? Do you think I'm a naughty child who ran away from home? Save it. You're even worse than a naughty child. At the very least, naughty children don't know what they're doing. You know everything, and you're still doing whatever you want. They kept pointing and whispering to each other, even though they were 2 tables away from me. However, they didn't dare to come over and talk to me. It was as if they were afraid that I would run away the moment they spoke. This was just, it's great that His Highness has returned. There's no need to worry about Her Majesty Rene's descendants anymore. Yeah, the people of the mist have descendants now. I hope that the first child will be a prince. That way, everyone can relax. I didn't believe the rumors back then, but after watching that opera, I knew it was true. Opera? Oh, that Princess Peach? I remember that Her Highness Rene acted as Princess Peach, and His Highness Roland acted as the Dragon Knight. In the end, the Dragon Knight kidnapped the princess. Oh, so that's what it means. Wait a moment, there was too much information in this story. Let me think about it first. Damn it, there was no way I could explain myself. There were too many things to comment on. Puffed. The silly cat was rolling around in laughter as usual. She didn't care about her image at all after transforming into a cat. I opened my mouth, intending to refute the rumors, but then immediately closed it. How should I refute the rumors? Should I say that I was the one who acted as Princess Peach? It turned out that the rumors hadn't disappeared even after so many years. In fact, they were becoming more and more intense. I finally understood why my 2 concubines were so unfriendly towards me. Was it because in their hearts, I was their love rival? Numerous gazes were sneaking glances at me, sideways, and out of the corner of their eyes. This overly intense, yet indirect gaze caused my scalp to go numb. But I had originally come to this event to calm everyone down, to express the fact that I'm in the Northlands and don't intend to go out and cause trouble for the time being, as well as to give some pressure to those restless rats hiding in the gutter. The main event hadn't even begun yet, so it would seem rather inappropriate for me to run away. Forget it. Let's get down to business. And so, while everyone else was happily chatting, toasting, and chatting, I did my best to focus on the documents in my hands. It was as if I was a pitiful person who only remembered on the last day of my summer vacation that I hadn't finished my summer vacation homework yet. Ahem, that was just an analogy. Did I look like someone who forgot to do their summer vacation homework? That's right, I never handed in summer vacation homework. So how could I possibly do it? Ever since I arrived into Finder, I hadn't even finished reading the documents in my hands. There were far too many things that I needed to deal with, and far too much homework that I needed to catch up on. Not only that, these things were all quite important, and I couldn't afford to be careless. Right now, I was currently holding the latest battle report for the continent, which was basically the hottest news in the world right now. The battle between the old and the new archmages ended with both sides heavily injured. Yonye says that both sides are incredibly weak. These little things are becoming more and more clickbait. They want me to write a review, and they're even using me as an example. The Bardi Empire's undead army had finally been stopped. Not only had the Bardi Empire's ally, the Immemorial Dragons, attacked, but the Bardi Empire's ally, the Archmages from the Mage Country, had also attacked. You really wrote something like the Truth Symposium was beaten up by an undead emperor? You really dared to write something like that? The Cloud Tower must be furious. Those ancient artifacts are so difficult to deal with. Nonsense, I'm not that foolish. I said if we only look at the Truth Symposium's strength on paper, they're still slightly weaker than the undead emperors. How did it become? Emperor Yongya says that the Truth Symposium's archmages are all trash with a combat strength of 5. Those heartless gnomes actually twisted my words. Do they want me to be killed by those ancient artifacts? This battle report was from the Bardi Empire. Both sides were mages, so the headlines weren't too clickbait. Due to my special status as a member of the mage country's Truth Symposium, as well as an undead emperor retired, the fairies brought me a memory crystal and asked me to comment on the battle. All I did was casually say a few words. It would seem that my outdated commentator had gotten into quite a bit of trouble. Are you a newcomer? You actually believe in the integrity of a news reporter? Do you want me to help you write a letter to the Truth Symposium to explain? Just a small commission would be fine. No need. They're no idiots. In this day and age, anyone who believes the headlines of those gnomes would be an idiot. Due to their greedy personalities and the fact that they would do anything as long as there was money to be made, the fairies who had shops all over the world had a new name for themselves. But since they were professional information brokers, even if the headlines were exaggerated, the content would still be the truth. As I looked at this battle report, I recalled the memory crystal I had seen 2 days ago. The spreading undead calamity had finally been stopped. The Truth Symposium's archmages had used a forbidden spell right at the head of the undead calamity. This fire and earth dual-element forbidden spell had directly changed the terrain of that area, creating a new volcanic area. This had also eliminated a lot of cannon fodder. From a certain standpoint, those ancient artifacts were quite advanced with the times. Several archmages had teleported into the battlefield with their floating towers, and then had a forbidden spell mage stand inside the floating tower and chant an incantation, waiting for the enemy to enter their range. This was essentially no different from my previous battle against the undead calamity. Meanwhile, the undead emperor's method of recovering was to instantly cast a forbidden spell just as viciously. I didn't know how they managed to do it, but it was a large-scale withering spell. However, judging from the area and power of the spell, it was indeed at the level of a forbidden spell. The spell drained all the water in the plains, transforming all the animals and humans into dried corpses. The exchange of forbidden spells was only the beginning. The mages' duel would be the main show. The Bardi Empire and the Mage Country had sent 7 Truth Symposium-level archmages and 3 supreme immemorial dragons. It would seem that they had planned on fighting 2 against 1. All sorts of spells flew about on the battlefield. Ancient forbidden spells and secret techniques were nothing more than cabbages. I couldn't even recognize most of the spells, but at least I could tell who was winning and who was losing. It could be seen that this battle was only a test. Neither side was serious to the point of using their full strength. After all, it would be foolish for mages to go all out before figuring out the enemy's strongest areas and trump cards. The result was just as the record said. Neither side died, and the injured weren't too seriously injured. It was just that the map of that area would probably need to be redrawn. There'd be a bunch of volcanoes, lakes, mines, and ice plains. The original map would obviously be useless. Judging from the process of the battle and the result, although neither side used their trump cards, the Truth Symposium's old-timers were actually at a disadvantage. Harlow's teacher and Marguerite's teacher were among the Truth Symposium's members. They were all old-timers that even I didn't dare to provoke. I casually tossed aside the newspaper. This was only the beginning. Both sides would continue fighting. Only after the mages learned the enemy's trump cards would they use their trump cards that would kill them. Rather than having the mages' power level, the mages' will to fight was even more suspicious. Have a Truth Symposium's old-timers fight to the death? For the sake of another country? The undead emperors are probably still testing the mortal plane's retaliation. This will take some time. Just as I was deep in thought, a sudden voice interrupted my thoughts, giving me the urge to break into a run for it. Her Majesty Glina of the Sluir Kingdom has arrived. Chapter 662. Her Majesty Glina Casso has arrived. Damn it, why didn't you inform me? The joyous welcome song was still ringing in my ears, but I was doing my best to find a way to escape. Meanwhile, the attendants around me and Renee didn't even try to hide their evil smiles, which made me realize that I had been scammed again today. Why did I have to run? I didn't know either, but I mysteriously felt anxious. However, I felt like if I didn't run now, I would be in big trouble. Is that really necessary? It's just that you haven't paid child support fees for 8 years. Although you're completely disqualified as a father, you've been disqualified in many other ways. Is it really necessary to care so much? I suddenly understood. So this was the problem. Back then, for the sake of convenience, I had taken that lass as my adopted daughter and even changed her bloodline. Legally and by blood, we were now father and daughter. Now that my father had been gone for so many years, the child support and pocket money I received had all been cut off. So this was what I was feeling guilty about. I recently made a small fortune. At most, I'll pay you back double. When I thought of this, I mysteriously calmed down. I forced out a smile and walked to the door. It's been 8 years. Back then, she was only a teenager. She's probably 20 now. A girl changes 18 times between childhood and womanhood. Perhaps she'll become a mature beauty, but reality was always cruel. Asterisk boom. Asterisk the moment I stepped into the hall, I saw a pair of metallic feet. The gray armored feet seemed to be made of pure steel, and faintly cracks appeared on the floor as it stepped on. My smile froze as an ominous premonition appeared in my mind. In the next second, my nightmare became reality. This was a gigantic metallic armor that was more than 3 meters tall. It had a humanoid body for gigantic limbs and a mechanical backpack on its back. Its heavy appearance reminded me of the mage country's diamond puppets. The 2 light bulbs on its head lit up when it saw me. It was as if it was a vulture staring at its prey, as if it was a demon from hell. It opened up its metallic arms and pounced at me. Crack! Crack! Rock fragments flew everywhere as the ground shook. It was a pitiful scene where cracks appeared all over the floor. In front of me, a strong gust of wind blew and rock fragments flew everywhere. It was as if a train was about to crash into me. I wanted to dodge, but a familiar voice from the helmet's sensors stopped me. Dad, I miss you so much. A child's voice unique to puberty came from the metal giant's head. That familiar voice caused me to shake. Back in the day, she had left without saying a single word, yet she still recognized me as her father. A mysterious sense of guilt welled up in my heart. So, this was just her way of expressing how much she missed me. So this was just a touching father-daughter reunion. At least act like an adult. I stood up and opened my arms with a smile, welcoming the hug of my daughter, and then there was nothing after that. I only felt a strong force flying towards me, and I heard the sound of bones cracking. It was so painful that I felt like at least a dozen bones had broken. Pain and consciousness flew out of my body, and the next instant, my consciousness flew out as well. And my final thought was, it looks like a diamond puppet. It also feels like a diamond puppet when I hit it, and it also feels like a diamond puppet when I touch it. My daughter, you become so heavy. Yeah, the little girl waving at the door looks so familiar. She looks like Galena. Damn, I've been tricked again. It really was a solid diamond puppet that hit me. At this time, I was still doing my best to maintain my consciousness. However, I would rather have fainted because I saw black smoke rising from the top of this diamond puppet's head. Based on how things had developed, what happened next should be asterisk boom. Asterisk, it was said that on that day, even the entire palace was shaken by the explosion. What a familiar ceiling. I opened my eyes and casually commented. How could I not be familiar with the smell of medicine and the white ceiling? Recently, this hospital in the palace had almost become my home. I'll tell you beforehand that I didn't do that on purpose. You just lost control and self-destructed as always? Then was that on purpose? I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I thought back in the day. In order to prevent information from being leaked to Cavendish, not only had I left these 2 girls behind to go to the battlefield, I had even intentionally isolated them and guarded against them. This guilt made me unable to get angry, even if I wanted to. However, when I looked in the direction where the sound came from, I was astonished. You. How is this possible? Don't misunderstand. I wasn't exclaiming about how a girl would change so much, but rather, why haven't you changed at all? It was still the same familiar doll-like head, the the same familiar dazzling blonde hair, the same familiar right eye patch. Oh, this one had a little bear drawn on it, which seemed somewhat different. Hearing me say this, Galena glared at me angrily. If I really had to find something different, it would be that the current Galena was much more human than the emotionless ice doll of the past. Back when I was 11 or 12 years old, I appeared to be 8 or 9 years old due to the sealed demon bloodline. Now that I was in my 20s, I still appear to be 8 or 9 years old. Then I'll have to ask you, just what type of blood did you give me back in a day? I paused in surprise as I broke out in a cold sweat. Unlike Renee, who gave up on blood transfusions in order to cultivate the path of chaos, I used my own bloodline to cover her in order to completely remove the influence of Cavendish's bloodline. From a certain standpoint, she was now my corrupted bloodline, and her appearance hadn't changed even after 8 years. Didn't that mean that System, be honest with me. Just how long did this bloodline take to reach adulthood? This bloodline is the combination of the essence of order and chaos. It's the only miraculous combination in the entire world. It's unprecedented and will be impossible to replicate in the future. Unprecedented? So you're saying that there's no precedent? It's impossible to calculate? You don't even know, yet you're giving it to me? The hotline you're broadcasting is busy. Please try again later. She even pretended that the line was busy. I was rendered speechless by this irresponsible system of mine. As I looked at Galena's youthful face, I suddenly felt that even my 500-year dusk fruit might not be enough. Although Galena's displeased expression was rather refreshing, I felt an increasing headache looking at this legal lowly. Can such a girl really be married off? Even if she marries off, they'll probably think that she's a pervert. Also, she's the heir to the Sluweir kingdom. No wonder I hadn't heard any rumors about Galena before. No matter how I looked at it, any rumors about such a queen would seem like a crime. It would seem that the ministers of the Sluweir kingdom had already given up hope on finding an heir. With her body size, it would be impossible for her to have any descendants even if she married off. Don't look at me like that. You're just like those annoying, nagging ministers. Do women have to have children? I never expected that Dad would be so old-fashioned. Galena's mouth was twisted in displeasure. She seemed just like a teenage girl who was dissatisfied with her parents' arrangements. Was this her late, rebellious period? The moment I said this, even the silly cat paused in surprise and almost fell off the bed. In this patriarchal era, most people believed that having children was the most important thing for women. It was quite impressive of her to say something like this. I took a deep breath. If you don't want to have children, then don't. I'll just treat it as me owing you something. I'll help you deal with your adopted father. Why did I feel like something was wrong? Relax. As your adopted father, I'll support you. If you don't want to have children, then don't. I'll help you have children. No, don't misunderstand. What I mean is that I need the wood spirit's biological technology to help me create artificial descendants. Asterisk crack. Asterisk this time. Even Galena paused in surprise. The silly cat, who had just crawled up, missed yet another step. This time, she looked at me with astonishment. What's the matter? Isn't this a good idea? Since it's possible to artificially create spare limbs, then it's technically possible to provide genes for artificial descendants, isn't it? The problem doesn't lie in the technology, does it? Even the ethics aren't right. There's something wrong with your head as well. I'm relieved, as expected of His Highness Roland from back then. Galena finally regained her senses and covered her mouth as she chuckled. It was unknown what she was looking at with her narrowed eyes. Just what was the most intelligent engineer in the Northlands thinking about? However, I felt a chill run down my spine. I was very familiar with this feeling. It was usually the feeling that I had been mysteriously scammed again. Chapter 663. As the ruler of a country, Galena was also incredibly busy. However, unlike Renee, who was rather atavistic in certain aspects, Galena was quite intelligent since she had experienced the coldness of the world since she was young. To be more specific, Galena had established an excellent administrative and military team, so that she didn't have to personally deal with every major issue. Of course, this was mainly so that she could make time to do her own research. It was said that Galena had made quite a bit of progress over the past few years. The Northland's bomb expert Galena Casso was now a world-famous bomb expert. From a certain standpoint, the intelligent and practical Galena was more like me, while Renee was more like an ape who only thought with her muscles. However, perhaps it was due to the fact that stupid children always cause trouble, making people worry about them, which was why they received more love and care. In the past, I indeed cared more about Rain than Galena. I felt that Galena had another side to her that made me feel at ease, but I always ignored her emotional needs. After being away for so many years, I even ignored my responsibilities as a father. Just thinking about it made my heart ache. Galena, I don't mind if you pretend to be a narrator, and I completely agree with you saying that Cavendish is an ape who only thinks with his muscles. But look over there. The other ape is about to explode. Galena, who had been pretending to be a narrator, turned around to see Renee smiling as she unsheathed her sword. It seemed that she intended to properly deal with this older sister of hers that she hadn't seen for so long. Yes, she was indeed her older sister. Her overly young appearance made me forget that Galena was actually older than Renee by 1.5 years. And then, the seemingly young girl immediately started running without another word, making faces as she ran. Come catch me, Gorilla Girl. Show off your muscles in front of your adopted father. As you wish. Oh my. Sword energy? Even Renee had become a sword saint, using sword energy to kill her own sister. It was indeed somewhat familiar. I was filled with emotions as I watched the sword energy and explosions rise and fall. These two sisters would fight each other right after the new year. Just how harmonious and friendly they were. I couldn't help but recall the past. Back in the day, it was rare for the whole family to gather together during the new year. I would also tease my younger brother like this, but in the end, I would always be pressed to the ground and beaten up. Ahem, time was limited, so let's talk less about our dark history. However, Galena wasn't lying. As the queen of a country, she was indeed very busy, especially as the monarch of a country. At the end of the year, there were all kinds of reports and summaries. In this regard, the end of the year was the end of the year. Just the calculation of this year's revenue and the allocation of next year's budget was enough to make all the departments fight for at least 10 days. Without a good reason, it was impossible to move a warship away from their own country at this time. My return doesn't count? Of course not. After all, my status in the Mist Alliance was rather special. I didn't have any official position, and I didn't even exist in the official channels. But nobody would believe that I didn't have any influence in the Mist Alliance and the Mist Kingdom. And so, I became that person, the person who everyone in the Mist Alliance knew about, but pretended not to exist on paper. I was an invisible person who wouldn't directly call my name. But this time, Galena's reason for coming here was to discuss a major event in the Mist Alliance. A major event that would allow her to toss aside countless trivial affairs at the end of the year. This was why I felt that Galena was more like me. We were both skilled at slacking off in the name of being fair and honorable. No, I meant that we would take care of our personal matters while dealing with official matters. Is there a difference? Of course there is. If you're just slacking off, not only does it sound bad, you'll even be punished later. If you slack off in the name of taking care of official matters, you can even apply for an IOU. The feeling of using official matters to purchase an ancient or out-of-print book that you want, the joy of spending someone else's money without feeling any heartache, and the feeling of not having to hesitate to buy it. Harloise, you're rich, so of course you wouldn't understand. This doesn't sound like Harloise's voice. Kay, Sister Kelly? I turned around and really wanted to slap myself. Wasn't the person in front of me the head administrator of the Mist Kingdom's royal palace? Wasn't this Sister Kelly, who was responsible for applying for the royal family's annual allowance and activity expenses? The Wood Elf Kelly was dressed quite beautifully today, and her smile was quite sweet. However, I felt a chill run down my spine. Oh, it would seem that I should reconsider His Highness Roland's allowance for next year. I think that keeping 1/10 of his allowance should be more than enough. Kelly left while smiling and talking to herself. As the head administrator of the royal palace, The royal palace was quite busy with a year-end banquet. It was already quite nice for her to even have time to spare. This time, she resolved to teach Roland, who she had spoiled too much, a lesson. No matter what he said, she wouldn't receive a single cent of his allowance for next year. This time, it was my turn to be in a bad mood. I had been hoping that I would be able to earn some allowance at the end of the year so that I would have an easier time next year. It would seem that I would have to find another place to swindle, earn some money. Was it normal for me to be poor? Actually, it was quite normal. If I didn't want to work, even a mountain of gold could be used up. Back when I was still young, I had given all my treasures to and the others to use. I hadn't brought much money with me to begin with. I myself didn't have much of a concept of money. I would gulp down several thousand gold coins worth of red wine in one gulp, or 2 copper coins worth of beer. I didn't have any limits when it came to spending money, and I was too lazy to go on adventuring quests to earn that bit of money. Every time I had money, I would spend it all within a month. I did have quite a few treasures on me, but I was reluctant to sell them. Even if I did sell them, nobody would dare to buy them. Actually, all independent adventurers without any faction supporting them were like this. As long as they didn't work hard to earn money or rob others, they would definitely be quite poor. Even when I returned to the surface, I was penniless. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been so thick-skinned as to ask Kelly for the royalties' annual allowance. Adoptive father, you should find a rich woman and marry yourself off. That way, you won't have to worry about breakfast tomorrow. Go away. Stop joking around. Am I someone who relies on a woman? Although I said that, 2 figures indeed flashed through my mind at that moment. The mother of a tribe and the elven empress. Both of them were the leaders of their tribes. They should be quite rich, right? Then, would I be able to lie down and live the rest of my life like a cripple? I swore that this thought only appeared in my mind for an instant before I unhesitatingly rejected it. You're so lacking in ambition. I don't want to raise a gigolo like you. The silly cat always jumped out at critical moments. Her words caused my face to heat up, and I angrily picked her up and threw her out the window. It's winter. As a cat, you should go catch mice for me as food reserves. Right, Gleena, since you're here, you must have new information regarding that application, right? Was it really awkward for me to change the topic? Cough, cough. Let's get back to the main topic. Let's talk about national affairs. On the surface, Gleena had come here to discuss national affairs. And the major matter that would make the 2 leaders of the Mist Alliance meet was naturally the application to join the Mist Alliance. Over the past few days, the Mist Alliance's spies and diplomats have been insanely busy. Since they weren't doing nothing, they had finally obtained some useful information. The Sohn Dukedom and Feldis Kingdom's application to join the Mist Alliance was sincere. As applicants, Grand Duke Leon and King Vincent, they were both prepared to give up part of their royal authority. And since they had already made this decision, they didn't hide the reason why they wanted to join the Mist Alliance. The Stanley Theocracy? The Holy Church again? The most convincing information came from the 2 countries themselves. The reason why the 2 countries' royal families were willing to jump into a pit of fire was because there was an even greater pit of fire waiting for them. The Divine Northern Battlefront Alliance? Damn it, is the Holy Church done yet? You should first count how many incarnations of the God of Holy Light you've killed already. He's probably never suffered such a huge loss in all these years. The silly cat appeared from an unknown corner and had a serious expression as she talked about serious matters, as if the awkwardness, ambiguity, from earlier had never happened. Now that the information was right in front of us, the Holy Church's clumsy scheme was also right in front of us. The Divine Northern Battlefront Alliance was proposed by the Stanley Theocracy, a small country in the north. The Stanley Theocracy wanted to use the God of Holy Light's teachings to create an alliance of northern countries similar to the Mist Alliance, so that they could work together against the Mist Alliance. The participating countries would be the countries to the south of the Mist Alliance. As long as this alliance was truly established, it would be possible to trap the Mist Alliance in the north. Obviously, the Stanley Theocracy was the core of this divine alliance, and its national power wasn't even 1/5 that of the Feldis Kingdom. The Stanley Theocracy was definitely backed by the Holy Church. In fact, The Holy Church had recently sent 2 high-level knight squadrons and a cardinal to the Stanley theocracy. But it was obvious that this was a trap. Joining this alliance would mean completely offending the Mist Alliance, and the Holy Church would also be using this alliance as cannon fodder. The recent developments proved that the cardinals, who were experts at internal conflicts and amateurs at external wars, were absolute idiots when it came to war. They were experts at obtaining benefits for themselves, and the Holy Church wouldn't even dare to imagine how the Stanley theocracy's future would develop if it became a subordinate country of the cardinals. The Holy Church had already sent official letters to the various countries' royal families. After so many years, the God of Holy Light had never paid so much attention to the small countries in the Northlands. But from a different perspective, this meant that they couldn't just go with the flow. They needed to make a choice. And so, the Sohn Dukedom and Feldis Kingdom decided to join the Holy Church. Just what are those idiots thinking right now? Defending against the Mist Alliance? Aren't we supposed to be allies now? I was rather astonished and angry, but even more than that, I felt pitiful numbness. It was as if I had already expected such a thing from the bottom of my heart. Cough! Our ally just used a forbidden spell on our ally. Don't be so astonished. Don't you know what's going on? For some powerful individuals in the Order faction, is there any difference between the Hades and the Chaos faction? Compared to an enemy that they've fought against for so many years, wouldn't it be more worth being on guard against a junior who was born from their own flesh and blood and wants to surpass them? Chapter 664. Not long ago, the Holy Church's faction had suffered a major loss in the Chaos Abyss battlefield in San Antonio. The great demon empire and demon armies had returned, and the Holy Church's knight and low-level angel armies had suffered heavy losses. While the actual losses were bearable, the damage to the Holy Church's reputation would be quite difficult to make up for. And it just so happened that the Hell faction managed to achieve such a glorious victory against the Northlands faction at such a time. This made the losers seem even more useless. That's right, in the eyes of the world, being able to achieve such a result against the Demon Wave and Donati's could already be considered a victory. As for the Elven God's death, it was already fated that the Demon Wave would begin here. Everyone was watching the battle. The Elven Gods had suffered a major loss at the beginning and suffered a terrible defeat on the battlefield, while the Elven Gods had won a great victory. Not only did the Elven Gods survive, they even brought the Elven Empire's inheritance to the Northlands. Naturally, this was a major blow to the Holy Church's reputation. Some people had suffered losses and lost face outside of the Northlands. Instead of thinking about how to regain face, they wanted to suppress their allies and subordinates so that others wouldn't rebel against them due to a lack of reputation. I was only stating the facts. I definitely didn't think of a certain transport team captain who wanted to deal with the outside world first. The rise of the Southern Sect, the God of Holy Light's numerous obstructions, the Holy Church's reputation in all the other countries, and even the number of believers in the Holy Church's parishes had greatly decreased. All of this was shaking the Holy Church's foundation. And so, in the eyes of certain factions within the Holy Church, the Hades faction and that man who had been hiding behind the Holy Church's back were far more hateful and dangerous than the Chaos faction. Logically speaking, it is indeed understandable that to resist foreign aggression, one must first pacify our internal affairs. Constructing a line of defense and isolation was the Holy Church's way of testing us. However, if we failed to respond appropriately, this line of defense would be of great use. It might even become a solid defensive wall that exiles us barbarians to the northeast corner of the world. Once the Mist Alliance's blockade was completed, the Mist Alliance would be forced into a passive position in terms of strategy. The Mist Alliance would have to break through the Mist Alliance's blockade in order to invade the south. The Mist Alliance would have to let the Northlands fight their own battles, giving us enough time and space to prepare our strategies. This was the most recent mantra of the Cardinals, who advocated for constructing a defensive line. And if the Mist Alliance's blockade was truly completed, it would be far more useful than the benefits on paper. The Holy Church's threat to the Northlands was mainly due to the fact that the Northlands were currently unable to be self-sufficient. Food, weapons, equipment, clothing, and would all had to be traded with other countries. The moment these trades were cut off, the effects would be tremendous. And right now, the Northlands elves are on their way back to the Northlands. If they were cut off, never underestimate the Holy Church's shamelessness. The Holy Church's fanatical believers and greedy scammers were capable of making any immoral act seem like a good deed. They were capable of treating every merchant as a demon worshiper and hunting them down. We needed to be prepared to be completely cut off from the Holy Church. And if the Mist Alliance really wanted to reinforce another ally, not only would it be impossible for their ground troops to invade the south, they would even be intercepted by the Angel Army in the air. It could be said that the Mist Alliance had completely isolated the Northlands Mist Alliance from a strategic standpoint. And if the Mist Alliance decided to forcefully break through and invade the south first, then the Mist Alliance would be labeled as an invader and a civil war. From a certain standpoint, this scheme was indeed quite sly and sinister on paper. But if I had to say, is the Mist Alliance's planner an idiot? Does he really think that the other countries are his chess pieces and idiots? Would anyone actually fall for such an obvious strategy that's just using them as cannon fodder? I was quite astonished. This was basically forcing the smaller countries in the south to make a choice between the Mist Alliance and the Holy Church. Where did the Holy Church get the confidence to believe that they would be able to achieve complete victory? Even a powerful dragon would have to give face to a local snake. No matter how powerful the Holy Church was, its foundation was still in the central region of Ike. In the Northlands, the Mist Alliance was still stronger. No, they're no idiots. It's just that they haven't woken up from the glory they've enjoyed over the past few years. They still think that everything is still like 10 years ago, when the Holy Church claimed that they were the only rulers, and that royalty could only tremble in front of divine authority. In their eyes, they're the ones with the most power, and those Northlands barbarians should be taking this opportunity to kiss their own boots. Galena's words were filled with venom, but she spoke the truth. The Holy Church's planner probably believed that he would be able to make the smaller countries submit if he brought a powerful army to the Northlands. That might not be the case. There are 12 countries in total. The other countries didn't give me any information. Hasn't their plan already been mostly successful? Renee's words caused everyone present to shake their heads. Without any support, Renee's political foresight would probably only be able to see the front lines. She would only realize that she had been tricked after being beaten up. I once again confirmed that Renee absolutely needed to have an expert administrator by her side. And now that Empress Ivy had appeared, everyone heaved a sigh of relief. And now, Empress Ivy was stealthily tugging on her husband as clothes, indicating that he shouldn't make wild guesses as she told me the final possible truth. No, they're just waiting. They're waiting for us to offer them something to join us. They're waiting for the other two countries to receive a response. They're waiting for us to determine a winner between us and the Holy Church. Making a prompt decision required courage. No matter what the situation was, there would always be a lot of opportunists. If we forced the smaller countries too far, it would be the same as giving the opportunists to the smaller countries. I now had a headache. The current situation had changed yet again. If the two countries only wanted to join us, we could use various reasons to reject them. But if we rejected them now, that would be the equivalent of pushing the neutral party into the smaller country's arms. And if we reluctantly agreed to join the Mist Alliance, that would be a good thing for the Mist Alliance's long-term development. After all, we would be able to obtain the food that we needed the most. However, it would be a destructive blow to our overall defensive strategy. Perhaps we would have to extend our defensive line much further south. Will we have to give up on our natural strongholds and defend the plains? That would be such a huge loss. Perhaps the silly cat had met a silly mouse, or perhaps the Holy Church had truly schemed to such an extent. At the very least, this move from the Holy Church indeed made things rather difficult for us. This was the Mist Kingdom's royal conference hall. It could be said that all the higher-ups of the Mist Kingdom were attending this meeting. However, when I brought up this issue and also mentioned the overall defensive strategy for the entire Northlands, everyone fell silent. In order to increase my persuasiveness, I tossed out some documents and information that I had prepared beforehand for them to look over. For the next half an hour, there was only the sound of flipping pages in the conference hall. By the time they finished digesting the information they had, they were looking at me with strange expressions. Their expressions were mostly like, "Why didn't you say so earlier? How could you be such a scammer? Do you not trust your allies that much? Do you have no confidence in the war at all?" And so on. Every single one of them furrowed their eyebrows at the difficult problem I was facing. And then the conference entered a time where there was no progress at all. Some suggested accepting new allies, while others immediately asked what they should do about the defensive line. Some directly refused, while others immediately asked what they should do about the defensive line. In fact, some even tried to trick the other party into agreeing first. In the end, that idiot was directly kicked out of the conference hall. Was it so easy to earn some credibility in this day and age? In the end, I could only helplessly shake my head. Let's just stall for time. Indeed, this matter couldn't be rushed. We needed time to gather opinions, and the Holy Church also needed time to gather opinions. But at this time, it was necessary to maintain a friendly relationship with the smaller countries. Most of the people in the conference had left, but I was still calculating in my mind. Was there really no solution? That might not be the case. I had plenty of bad ideas. It would take 10 years for the Holy Church to realize what I had done. But right now, I needed stability. It would be easy to trick others, but it would be much more troublesome to clean up the mess. Compared to the current problem, I was more concerned about the Holy Church and the other order factions' hostility towards us. Not only that, this hostility wasn't limited to the Holy Church's Holy Light faction. Even the Neutral Nature faction and Dwarf God faction had distanced themselves from us over the past few years. Not only were they no longer as friendly as they were 8 years ago, it was even more obvious that they were on guard against us. Aren't we taking too big a step? I knew what I was doing. This didn't mean that we weren't doing well. In fact, it was the opposite. It was because we were doing too well. The very nature of belief in a god determined that population and belief were both resources to the gods. In that case, since it was a resource, if some people had more resources, there would naturally be fewer people. Previously, we had such a good relationship not only because we had similar ideals and similar natures, but also because we had a common enemy. We had to fight against the Holy Light faction within the Order faction, and we had to fight against the Chaos faction outside. But now, the Hades faction had only been on the stage for less than 10 years, but they were already suppressing the other god factions to the point where they couldn't even breathe. Their consecutive victories and victories not only gave the Holy Light faction a lot of pressure, but also made the Neutral God faction unable to take it anymore. And the fact that the Order faction had broken away from the Order faction also made the Neutral God faction quite apprehensive. Not to mention, the Elven God faction had been indirectly destroyed by my hand a few days ago. I wouldn't believe that the other god factions didn't have any thoughts about this. A tall tree would attract the wind. Only a mediocre person wouldn't be envied and hated by others. It was easy to say, but it would be incredibly foolish to stand out too much and make the entire world their enemy. This was the unspoken rule of the Order faction's many god factions. This was a proxy war that couldn't be fought directly. Or, to put it more bluntly, it would be an internal struggle for power that couldn't be spilled. No matter who it was, as long as they were too strong, they would naturally be attacked by the other factions. I just didn't expect this to happen so soon. I had hoped that I was wrong and that this trouble was caused by the Holy Church alone. However, my spies gave me information that the Nature faction had recently been quite close to the Holy Church, which made me think too much. The Joy and Laughter sisters? Sigh, it's all Amelia's fault. This time, I didn't just casually shift the blame to the Nature faction. More than 70% of the blame was on Amelia. The appearance of the wood spirits gave them even more authority than the immemorial children of nature. And the wood spirits and Amelia's recent activities greatly expanded the Hades faction's authority. The Hades faction's abilities in nature, life, plants, and so on had already far surpassed the Nature faction's divine miracles. Some things were quite difficult to explain, especially when it came to divine concepts. You say that you're the master of the ancient trees? The king of the trance? The wood spirits, sky-reaching trees, are several times taller than your trees. You say that you're the protector of life? You can reconstruct severed limbs? What? You need sacrifices and sacrifices? You need to make great achievements for a true god? False gods. The wood spirits only need one justice point to reconstruct severed limbs. Far too many things like this had happened before. I could completely understand the nature faction's frustrations. I also knew that the nature faction had once sent out god envoys in order to express their friendliness, hoping that Amelia would accept the nature faction's divine concept and become a member of the nature faction. Actually, there was nothing wrong with becoming a member of the nature faction, but the problem was that's Amelia, that crazy witch. Not only did she kick the god envoys out of the nature faction, the words she said at the time were now known to everyone. Those 3 difficult tasks still proved the nature faction's incompetence. Every time someone mentioned them, it was actually an insult to the nature faction. Nature god? Haha. As long as you're able to accomplish those 3 tasks. So what if you become a member of the nature faction? The first difficult task was the secret of life, using a plant's body to give birth to a mortal's body. This was something that surpassed the nature faction's capabilities. The nature gods were unable to accomplish it. The second difficult task was the secret of nature, making an apple tree bloom in one day, bear fruit in one night, plant seeds in one day, and become a forest in one night. This was something that the nature gods could accomplish, but forcefully catalyzing the cycle of reincarnation violated the most basic laws of nature. This was a major taboo for the nature faction. The third difficult task was the secret of the soul, making the son of nature's soul obtain eternity in the forest of dreams. Wood spirits were indestructible in the forest of dreams. Even if their physical bodies were destroyed, their souls could be reborn. This obviously broke the cycle of reincarnation. Even if the nature faction could accomplish it, they wouldn't dare to. These 3 difficult tasks doubtlessly proved Amelia's and the wood spirit's abilities. However, they also became the nature faction's humiliation. Even now, many archaic droll were still racking their brains, trying to think of a way to solve these 3 difficult tasks without violating the nature faction's teachings. Alright then, this was such a direct and vicious slap in the face. Amelia was already giving face to the Hades faction by not becoming the nature faction's mortal enemy. After all, for the gods, reputation also represented faith as well as actual benefits and power. Over the past few years, the drool and nature priests had betrayed Amelia and joined her side. This made the enmity between the nature faction and the Hades faction even worse. Of course, much of this enmity also involved the Hades faction. Whenever I thought about Amelia's increasingly strange temperament, I felt a headache coming on. Becoming the nature faction's mortal enemy seemed quite impressive, but in other words, it would be like being the target of everyone's scorn. I didn't want such a development at all. Perhaps it's time for me to suffer. Compared to the ending where the tallest tree in the forest will be destroyed by the wind, it's not necessarily a bad thing to be suppressed and suffer some losses. However, it's not so easy to take advantage of me, Roland. Be careful that you don't spit out more than you take in. After figuring out the general direction, it was quite easy to come up with a plan. I took out a pen and paper and began my first scheme of the new year. I meant making a plan. Chapter 665. The new year had just passed, and the winter hunt season was about to begin. Many trivial matters were mixed together, and the Mist Kingdom's royal palace and administrative departments were incredibly busy. Winter hunts were quite common in other countries in the continent. The cold winter made hungry beasts even more aggressive, making it easier for them to appear in front of humans. The cold weather also made it impossible for nobles to engage in other forms of entertainment or activities. And so, the nobles, who always wanted to find something to do when they had nothing better to do, began their winter hunting activities. A knight riding on a tall horse and accompanied by a fully armored entourage would chase down pitiful homeless and hungry beasts amidst the barking of hunting dogs. They would use the beasts' heads to decorate their military achievements, and used the beast's fur to decorate their rooms. Ah, those pitiful fellows were met with such misfortune just to find some food for their children. Humans were truly cruel. Galena, if you keep pretending to be a narrator, I'll send you back. Also, isn't the winter hunt here different from the one in other countries? Those beasts and magical beasts aren't pitiful at all. They all eat people. I felt rather helpless. Compared to the porcelain doll from back in the day, it was indeed a good thing that Galena had become more human-like. After all, a normal person without any psychological trauma wouldn't become like that. However, this last was sometimes a little too lively. Even I couldn't stand her expressionless and serious rambling. I was even starting to sympathize with Slewir's administrative officials. With a queen like her around, they must have had a great time being tormented by her every day. Hearing that I was going to send her back, Galena expressionlessly slapped the gigantic magic puppet she was sitting on. The diamond puppet, two Malawian Quachas that appeared out of nowhere. One Malawian Quacha had died due to self-destruction, rushed out of the group, and chased after the pitiful beast she was talking about. Of course, her entourage wouldn't allow the queen to be left alone. Several dozen knights hurriedly rushed out of the group and chased after her. Did the wry smiles on their faces mean that they were already used to this, or that they enjoyed it? Judging from their heartfelt respect and joy, I felt that it was likely the latter. Winter hunt? That's such a distant memory. The ground was already covered in frost. Horses' hooves echoed loudly on the ground, and the hot breath they exhaled instantly turned into white mist. The snowfall from earlier had caused the entire world to turn white. A boundless icy plain and snowy mountains were right in front of us. Even a winter hunt team of several thousand people seemed insignificant in comparison. Our team had set off early in the morning. Most of us were night mounts. The scouts and hunting dogs had set off long ago, and the aerial night should soon bring news of the beasts. The Northern Lands winter hunt is completely different from the other countries' winter hunts. They do it for entertainment, but we do it for survival. The living environment in the Northern Lands was extremely harsh, and the thick malice was not only directed at humans. The living environment of wild beasts and magical beasts was equally harsh. Once the mountains were sealed off by heavy snow, the wild beasts would not be able to find food in the mountains and would naturally come out of the mountains to attack humans. The beasts that could survive in the Northlands had long since mutated into something similar to magical beasts. Under the leadership of their leaders, the beasts would eventually form an unstoppable beast stampede that would attack villages and cities. In the past few decades and centuries, countless villages have been destroyed by the winter beast stampede. From a certain standpoint, beasts that couldn't find anything to eat would group up and attack humans. This had already become a tradition of the Northlands beast stampede. Naturally, the Northlanders also formed another tradition. Whenever winter arrived, they would start a winter hunt in order to kill as many threats as possible while they were still in their infancy. They would attack before the beast stampede formed into a beast stampede. They would do their best to kill the beast stampede's leader and disperse the beast stampede that had just gathered. This would reduce or even destroy the scale of the beast stampede. History and tradition had proven that this method was much better than waiting in a castle for the beast stampede. Passively defending would only cause the stampede to grow larger and larger. Once all the magical beasts in the snowy mountains came out, it was possible to meet any high-level creature. It was already a historical event that the Northlands cities would be destroyed. Most countries in the Northlands had a tradition of winter hunting. However, challenging the beast stampede required more than courage. Even fully armed knight squadrons wouldn't be able to deal with the sly and vicious beasts. If one didn't have enough power, going on a winter hunt would be the equivalent of delivering food to the beast stampede. The Donglan Principality had long since given up on winter hunting. During those years, the people of Donglan seemed to have gotten used to bringing their families to a major city like Definder the moment winter arrived. They would then hide in wooden houses and tremble as they listened to the beast's roars outside. They would pray that the beast stampede would pass as soon as possible and that their homes and businesses wouldn't be destroyed too badly. And this was for the best. Every year, countless residents would be ambushed by beast stampedes while migrating. The Donglan Principality's night squadrons weren't enough to protect them at all. 8 years ago, when we returned to the Northlands, we started organizing winter hunts again. Not only was it to get rid of the beasts and gather food, it was also to boost the people of Donglan's courage and morale, giving them a long-lasting sense of security. During the past 8 years, Donglan and the Mist Alliance have been growing in power. Donglan's military strength had become the most powerful in the Northlands. Naturally, there was no reason to stop the winter hunts. As the winter hunts continued, the beast stampedes' size decreased year after year. The pressure on the cities and villages was also greatly reduced. If it was possible to defeat the beast stampede early, the people of the Mist wouldn't need to carry out such a dangerous winter migration. Right now, several thousand of us were traveling. Although it seemed like a large scale, this was only the beginning and preparation for the winter hunts. Our main task was to investigate the beast stampede's location and size, so that we could discover high-level and mega-magical beasts. If it was a small beast stampede, we could destroy it beforehand. If it was a large beast stampede that numbered in the tens of thousands, we would leave it to the regular army to deal with. Winter hunts were two completely different concepts in the Northlands compared to the central regions. In warmer regions, winter hunts were an entertainment season for nobles to show off their military strength, as well as a climax season for them to seduce noble ladies. But in the Northlands, winter hunts were war training for soldiers. Participating in winter hunts was the duty and responsibility of every member of the royal family. Why didn't Galena return to the Northlands to organize winter hunts? Actually, the other countries in the Northlands held winter hunts every year. After so many years, the beast stampede size had long since been under control. Winter hunts weren't dangerous at all and could be carried out normally. However, the Donglan Principality had been weak for far too long, and the number of beast stampedes they had exceeded the total number of all the other countries combined. Controlling the beast stampede size wouldn't be as simple as killing them all. She was actually quite happy. Not only could she spend the new year with her younger sister, but she could also participate in winter hunts to relax. That was why she was adamant about not returning to the Northlands. I asked her retainers and learned that the situation in the Northlands was stable and that everything was fine, so I didn't forcefully chase her away. On the way back, she was overly active like a little rabbit, constantly causing trouble for the hunting team. Unfortunately, she had a special status, so we had to treat her seriously. But for me, Big Sister Kelly, what do you mean by if you want the royal allowance, then do your duty as a royal prince? I've already done so many winter hunts, and I've long since done my duty. It's so cold here, I just want to lie down on warm blankets and drink hot cocoa while daydreaming. We were still enjoying the wind as we waited for the scouts to report back. I got off my horse and rubbed my hands and stomped my feet. I still felt quite cold, and I speechlessly looked at the damn child who was already building a snowman by the roadside. I really wanted to go back to sleep. This damn child is so energetic. Can physical age really affect mental age to such an extent? But soon, I discovered that I was wrong. That 3-meter-tall snowman had been made into a magical puppet with obvious joints. Then, the great engineer inserted something into it and said something mysteriously. That snowman actually stood up and started moving with loud rumbling sounds. It was running, it was jumping, it was building an even bigger snowman. Is this the advanced version of a damned naughty child playing with snow? Seeing that I was looking in her direction, Galena, who had already jumped onto the snowman's shoulder, waved at me, indicating that I should go over as well. I wasn't an idiot. I already saw that you had added a large amount of explosives into the snowman. Why would I go over? I still hadn't had enough of the 1 Malawian kwacha explosion last time. So why would I go over to enjoy the 3 Malawian kwachas explosion? Wait a moment. MK3. Galena had indeed marked the snowman's head. In that case, the 2 Malawian kwachas that Galena had been stepping on, was it possible that it wasn't loaded with explosives? I reflexively moved further away from Galena. It's rare for Sister Galena to be so relaxed. Unlike us, who were all hugging each other like dumplings, Renee was wearing a black, tight-fitting hunting attire that showed off her beautiful curves. I suddenly discovered that she was actually taller than me. The nine-headed dragon leather attire seemed light and thin, but its defensive and cold-resistant properties were both astonishingly high. She seemed even more valiant when she was carrying a hunting bow. The night princess was becoming more and more mature. However, both of my concubines simultaneously rolled their eyes at me because I was standing too close to her. Renee chuckled when she saw that I was in a daze. Sister Glena isn't like this back in our country. She's the core strategist and pillar of the entire Mist Alliance. She's always so confident and dignified. Only in front of you will she truly relax and cast aside all that nonsense. She'll reveal that she's the same age as she appears to be. I felt rather guilty when I heard this. I had indeed been rather selfish back in the day. I had cast aside everything and just left, leaving the responsibility to two girls who had just reached puberty. They had to work so hard to support their family business on their own. I felt that I should properly compensate them. I would start by giving them more pocket money. Glena, I'm fine with you pretending to be the narrator. I do feel slightly guilty, but I really don't have any pocket money. While we were still joking around, two nights of ice and snow appeared in the western sky. The Aurora Knight, who had been acting as scouts, had returned. In that case, it was time to get down to business. However, the next instant, I heard a series of exclamations. One of the Aurora Knight had actually fainted on his own steed, while the other was also injured. There was no need to mention just how powerful an Aurora Knight was. Even a novice knight who had fainted during a scouting trip would be incomprehensible. However, this only made me feel more and more uneasy. It would seem that some of my previous guesses were correct. My luck was quite good this time. Not only had I come to the right place, I had even met my target ahead of time. Chapter 666. The Aurora Knight was the ace of the Northlands. Even before the Holy War, all of them were at least gold-ranked top-level knights. They had once been known as the strongest human knight squadron, and now, although they weren't as powerful as the Dragon Knight Squadron, they were still a strong candidate to become the strongest human knight squadron. As the ace of the Mist Alliance, the Donlon Principality, which was a major military power, naturally wouldn't mistreat these brave knights. Even though they were capable of summoning ice weapons and didn't rely on equipment, the Frigid Maw Knights were equipped with soft alloy magical armor, which allowed them to wear armor even after transforming. Plus, with the elemental tide and the changes in the realm of ice and snow, the entire Frigid Maw tribe's power level had greatly increased. This greatly increased the Aurora Knight Squadron's power level. Although the Frigid Maw Knight Squadron had the same weakness as the Dragon Knight Squadron, which was that more than 90% of their combat strength came from their mounts. Rather than calling them Knights, it would be more accurate to call them battle beasts that were paired with their trainers. Still, strength was strength. According to the olden generation standards, these knight squadrons were at least master in power level, which meant that they were at least legend in the olden generation. But now, one of them had fainted while the other was heavily injured just by patrolling some wild beasts. This was inconceivable. Fire element burns? In the Northlands? It was good that the knight squadrons had returned. Soon, the one who was still conscious told me what he had experienced. It was common practice for mounted scouts to spread out and expand their scouting radius. Aerial Knight Raven only went to save his comrade when he saw the distress flare. But when he arrived, his comrade was surrounded by a pack of winter wolves and lion tigers. He had already fallen to the ground, but his mount was still desperately trying to protect him. When Raven went down to save his companion, he was ambushed by a red-clothed person. Not only was that red-clothed person capable of using fire magic, even those strange winter wolves were capable of spitting out black flames. Raven was at a great disadvantage. If it wasn't for Frigid Maw casting an ice barrier in time to protect Raven and Raven, they would have been in big trouble. Black flames. Nobody doubted how an ice attribute winter wolf could breathe fire. This thing was basically a signature of the lower plains. If it wasn't an evil cultist that worshipped an evil god, then it would be a demon or devil's lackey. It would seem that things were about to get interesting. But hearing that, I smiled. Finally, I caught the tail. One of the reasons why we were in such a hurry to return to the Northlands was because there was a new development in the Demon Abyss. The Devil's Abyss in the north was what the locals used to call it. The official name was Roadbed Valley. It was an area of caves and valleys where light could not be seen during the day. Since the demons had invaded the main plane several times this time, the dimensional defense laws that were already broken and incomplete. It wasn't difficult to throw something up from the lower plane. In the past, there used to be a Mist Kingdom fortress here. However, after the incident with Cavendish, the aura of the Chaos Abyss here had become much weaker. No new demons had been teleported here for several decades, so the newly reborn Mist Kingdom didn't have the energy to invest in the defense of this place. However, the Mist Kingdom still had a permanent surveillance station here. Previously, there had been an incredibly high concentration of magic energy, which doubtlessly meant that something had arrived from the lower planes. However, the sentries hadn't seen anything. The worst-case scenario would be a demon army with a demon lord. That would mean that everyone would immediately prepare for war. The best result would probably be a group of troublemakers. Since we still hadn't found any traces of a demon army, it was likely that only a few people had arrived. This was to be expected. Compared to the icy Northlands, which was a hard bone to chew, the other regions would be easier to deal with. There would also be more benefits. The demon lords weren't idiots either. Nobody would be foolish enough to attack a hard bone before all the fat meat was taken away. Although there were only a few visitors from the Chaos Abyss, this wasn't a small matter, nor was it a major one. If we didn't deal with it properly, it would still cause major trouble. Evil god sacrifices and devil plagues would be quite troublesome as well. Over the past few days, the Mist Kingdom had pretended that they hadn't done anything. But actually, they had sent out all their intelligence agents to investigate every unknown outsider. However, we didn't find anything. It seemed that the visitors from the Chaos Abyss had no intention of mixing into the crowd. And now, we seem to have found their tails. It would seem that they intended to do something about the Beast Wave. I had originally expected that the Beast Wave's strength would surpass the previous record. Plus, with the actions of the Apostle from the lower planes, it seemed like a headache-inducing development was right before me. However, I was filled with delight. Powerful enemies weren't scary. What was scary was the unknown. Over the past few days, I had been trying to figure out just what scheme the Mist Kingdom was planning. Kidnapping a powerful figure, inciting a war between the allied countries, blowing up the Casso Dam to create a massive flood. I was scaring myself. The more I thought about it, the scarier I became. The more I thought about it, the worse I would think of others. Schemes weren't scary. Schemes that had always been hidden behind the scenes were scary. Now that I had been exposed, I was naturally quite happy. But right now, the most important thing was, we're going to personally capture those bastards. I spread out my angel wings and flew into the air when a cold wind blew at me. I was so cold that my entire body trembled, and my muscles felt them as I landed. It would seem that I was now at the top of the food chain with my normal ice resistance. Even though it had been almost a month since I had cast my forbidden spell, I was still far from being completely healed. I could only helplessly shake my head. I decided that I wouldn't be a burden to them. I would rather find a warm place to drink some hot cocoa while I watched those empty nights ascend to the heavens. Meanwhile, the silly cat on my shoulder was abnormally calm. She seemed to be sleeping with her eyes open. Actually, she had been like this ever since I began to regain some ability to move. She was the current Empress of the Elves. She had a rather ridiculous level of authority, but now that the elves were preparing to move to the Northlands, she had many things to worry about. Although her true body was by my side, her clone had been busy working with the elves and was about to die from exhaustion. As long as I didn't touch her, she really was just like a cat doll. Since I had to wait for the results, should I try drawing something on her face? I was rather hesitant, but the silly cat suddenly turned her head around. The black cat on my shoulder suddenly turned around 180 degrees, making me think of something out of a horror movie. Roland, I made a new discovery. I definitely didn't intend to write meat slave or meat slave on your head. New discovery? What new discovery? And then I saw the silly cat forget what she had just said. She rubbed her head for quite a while, and even conjured a mirror to look at herself. I was just joking. Haha, you fell for it. You actually took it for real? Am I such a boring and childish person? You are. The silly cat didn't trust me at all. She started inspecting her own body. She was even hugging her tail and inspecting it, as if she was worried that I had left some incredible words on it. Before this farce ended, the Sky Night Knights returned. They had someone to guide them to the Northlands. The Aurora Night Knights were as fast as the wind. It would be quite difficult to escape their pursuit in the Northlands. Several dozen Sky Night Knights, including Renee, personally acted. The Winter Wolves didn't even have time to react before they were instantly annihilated. The red-clothed man was also instantly captured alive. But when he was tossed in front of me, I saw traces of familiarity. Although he was wearing a cloak, he was actually a demon wearing a mask. When I removed his mask, I saw that there was nothing on his face. His face was like a whiteboard, and he had no eyes, ears, or mouth. His limbs were twisted like noodles, and his physical body was barely humanoid. He looked like a mollusk as he lay on the ground, as if he were a nightmare from a fairy tale. What is this? Evil. I cast Detect Evil Chaos on him. His body was so red that it was almost black. His twisted body was covered in an obvious black light. For him to be so chaotic, he was probably a demon or a devil. I nodded in satisfaction. I would leave the rest to the professional prison wardens. In front of cruel torture, the only difference between a devil and a mortal would be how long they could last. The Night Knights that returned didn't only bring back this letter. They also brought back the corpses of several winter wolves. When I inspected them, some had horns on their foreheads, and some had scales on their claws. It was obvious that they had been demonized. Most of the Northland's creatures were of the ice element or neutral element. They were also capable of spitting fire. Even if it was the demonic fire of the lower planes, this could only mean that they had transformed into a completely different species. This level of demonization was already far beyond common sense. My mood became rather heavy. This situation was probably no coincidence. Once the beast wave began to demonize on a large scale, the threat level would skyrocket. With this unexpected change, the previously jovial vanguard of the winter hunt suddenly fell silent. It was as if something invisible was shrouding us. The Mist Alliance was facing a scheme from the Holy Church, and there was a scheme for the lower planes as well. It would seem that we were truly being taken seriously. The other scouts soon received reports as well. They actually found traces of red-clad demons in other beast packs. It would seem that we weren't lucky at all. There were far too many of these demons, and they probably weren't afraid of losses. A storm is brewing. To tell the truth, the reason why I hated government work the most wasn't because I was too lazy to do things. It was because once you started taking things seriously, you would discover that the harder you worked, the more work there would be for you to do. The more serious and responsible you were, the more new responsibilities would fall onto your shoulders. That sounds reasonable, but the Holy Church's trouble is directly related to the forbidden spell you cast on the elves, isn't it? I admit to that, but the ones causing trouble in the beast packs are all devils. Speaking of devils, who do you think devils hate the most right now? Why do they come here? Are you certain that you don't need to take responsibility? I admit to that as well, but that's all you have to say to help the elves. Besides, who was the one who organized this migration? Since you brought the elves here, it wouldn't be wrong to take responsibility. Having someone who knew about your past was always troublesome. If she was a sharp-tongued woman, that would be the most troublesome of all troublesome. I was rendered speechless after just a few complaints. In that case, I became the root of all evil, and all the trouble was caused by me. Killing me would save everyone a lot of trouble. That's what you said yourself. Thinking about your current ranking on the Calamity rankings, I think that's quite reasonable. We were currently still in the Mist Kingdom's royal palace. It was just that the superior elf leaders were all here to discuss their future territories. Although we were laughing and commenting, this was a major problem. If we didn't deal with it properly, it would likely lead to civil war and internal strife. Although the Northlands was large, there wasn't a single piece of uninhabited land in the Northlands. On the map, Even uninhabited territories would be part of a certain country's territory. Perhaps others wouldn't be able to develop this territory even if they took it. But if you just took it away, they would fight you to the death. Many people would be completely unreasonable when it came to territory. However, there was one piece of land that had always belonged to the elves. And now, that piece of land was the only uninhabited land in the Northlands. Yes, some people might have already recalled that the tassel kingdom of the elves in the Northlands had its guardian god's death, which completely destroyed the natural barrier that controlled the climate. This overturned the natural laws of nature, which naturally resulted in the natural laws of nature taking revenge on the tassel elves. Endless natural disasters completely destroyed that piece of land. At the time, the tassel elves had already migrated to the Donglan Principality and became citizens of the tassel dukedom. Back then, the tassel elves had spent a lot of effort in migrating and settling the refugees there. Now 8 years had passed, and that piece of land had returned to peace. However, it had become a buffer zone between the Mist Alliance's kingdom of the elves and the human countries. Nobody had ever controlled it, and now it seemed that it was time to return it to the elves. However, only when we truly began to do so did we discover that a series of troubles had come knocking on our door. Chapter 667. When the Mist Alliance was first established, the Moon Elves from the Northlands had joined as well. Actually, the entire Northlands had joined as well. If the Moon Elves didn't join, that would be the equivalent of isolating themselves and becoming little lambs sleeping in the mouth of a dragon. But even though the Moon Elves had joined as well, their status in the Mist Alliance had always been quite awkward. How was the relationship between the elves and humans? Their bitter friendship didn't even need to be mentioned. The grudges between the elves and humans had already given rise to countless historical stories. It would be no problem for the elves to support countless playwrights and novelists. The core of the Mist Alliance was the two major Mist Kingdoms, and the Mist people were humans. In that case, the core of the Mist Alliance would naturally be humans. As for other species, such as beastmen, Northlands barbarians, undead, and underground factions, they were either allies from the very start or enemies that had been defeated. As long as one side was strong enough and the vassal side didn't have much conflict, it wouldn't be too difficult for them to join together. So-called joining together meant that there would be one voice telling us what to do, and nobody would oppose us. Joining together with the entire Mist Alliance sounded simple, but it actually included a series of actions and projects. Some of the most important ones were the construction of transportation routes, the redistribution of administrative responsibilities, and the unification of military ranks. These policies didn't seem like much, and they seemed like they were just for show, but they actually directly affected whether the Mist Alliance was truly united or just a pile of loose sand. In the past, the roads between different countries, if those muddy and messy mountain roads could be considered roads, then roads would probably barely cover more than 5% of the roads. Although build roads first if you want to get rich was just a slogan, it definitely wasn't just empty words. This was especially true in this era of cold weapons. The difference between horse carriages and walking wasn't just in speed. The amount of goods transported by horse carriages and horses was completely different from the amount of goods transported by horse carriages. When goods couldn't be sold, farm products were left to rot in the fields, and the price of goods transported from mines was higher than the price of ores. So-called development would be nothing more than empty words. As for transporting goods by air, not to mention the terrible ratio of air transportation to transportation costs, the Mist Alliance's airships alone wouldn't be able to handle regular transportation tasks. It should be known that while roads might seem inconspicuous, tens of thousands of people would use them every day. Not only that, it was a permanent investment. Every time they used air transportation, the Mist Alliance would have to calculate the cost to see if they would be able to make a profit. But, unlike the residents of a certain world who desired a better life, the residents of the feudal era had lived like this for generations. They didn't think there was anything wrong with it. Relying on the heavens to make a living seemed like it was only natural. If the Mist Alliance really started building roads and started using labor, they would feel that it was too much. Not only did they feel that the Mist Alliance's domain's domain, but they also felt that the Mist Alliance, the domain's domain, was the end. But the Mist domain's Mist. The Mist domain was also the Mist Empire domain's domain. The Alliance domain, Lord's domain's domain. The Mist Alliance's establishment also meant that the Mist Alliance's domain lords were no longer afraid of being attacked by others for building roads. Not only that, Donglan, Sluir, and other countries were rapidly developing, as well as improving their citizens' living standards. Of course, the most direct part was that countless new gadgets had appeared, which indeed touched the hearts of the people who hadn't changed for generations. Many people now truly desire change. But to put it nicely, almost 20% of the Mist Alliance's total tax revenue over the past 8 years have been invested into the Mist Alliance. The Mist Alliance's road coverage had increased from 5% to 10%. Now, all of the Mist Alliance's roads had 4 lanes of stone. Although this number was small and the roads looked shabby, this already meant that all of the country's main roads were now passable. They wouldn't be completely cut off when it rained or snowed. As for the details, that was the responsibility of the various countries and domain lords. The Mist Alliance was already doing a good enough job as an alliance between countries. The completion of these main roads also meant that normal administrative tasks and documents could now be sent back to normal. Centralization of authority was beginning to replace the feudal system. Secret messengers from kings would often appear in novels and dramas. Although these messengers represented the people's sincere desire for justice and their enmity towards evil domain lords, they were also the result of inconvenient transportation and ineffective government orders. As communication became smoother and more normal, the redistribution of administrative responsibilities meant that the Mist Alliance's countries were no longer independent entities. Not only was the royal authority and domain lord authority weakened, but the various countries also began to follow the Mist Alliance's policies and plans. This gigantic Northland's giant now had a skeleton that could support itself. Of course, these policies had already received the approval of the various countries' kings. They were all quite shameless and wouldn't cause the domain lords to retaliate. It was best not to talk about this. Just the games and schemes involved would be enough to last several days. Following this was the mutual recognition of military ranks and the reorganization of the armies. This was the equivalent of giving all the knight squadrons, military officers, and knight nobles of the Mist Alliance's countries a number. This would allow them to recognize each other's ranks, and they would all listen to the Mist Alliance's overall commander under the name of their country's king. Of course, this would only be an unconventional arrangement that would only take effect during times of war. Normally, the knight squadrons would still be doing their own things. Only at this stage would the Mist Alliance's combat strength be able to cooperate with each other and be effective in battle. But this was only a brief introduction. The messy matters involved could be written into a novel. It would be far too long to go into detail. As for the elves, or more accurately speaking, the Northland's Moon Elves, the Mist Alliance's plan was stuck at the very first step. According to the original plan, the Mist Alliance would need to clear out a road to the Moon Kingdom of the Elves. However, one of the roads would naturally be the Tassel Kingdom of the Elves' territory. That was where the elven countries and the human countries were connected. There used to be a road there, and it was an excellent road built by the Tassel Kingdom. Although the natural calamity had caused severe damage to parts of the road, repairing the original road will be far easier than rebuilding it from scratch. No matter if it was in terms of time or cost, it would save more than 70% of the elven country's time and money. However, this area doesn't belong to any of the Kingdom of the Elves. We refused to pay for the construction of this road. From a certain standpoint, this was basically a lie. This road could only lead to the Elves' territory. What did the Elves' territory mean by refusing to repair it? According to the Mist Alliance's current policy, the local country would pay 70% of the cost of repairing the road, while the Mist Alliance would pay 30%. This was common sense as well as tradition. The local country would benefit the most, so the local country would naturally pay more. However, the Mist Alliance was only paying 30%, which was already an astronomical amount when considering the cost of masks. However, there was a small problem with this policy. As mentioned before, the Tassel Kingdom's territory didn't belong to any country on the map. The Kingdom of the Elves would use this reason to refuse to pay for the road, which was barely acceptable. However, there were also such obscure areas on the map. In the end, the domain lords all readily paid for the road. Nobody was an idiot. Refusing to repair the road would not only mean missing out on the opportunity to develop their infrastructure, it would also mean isolating themselves from the Mist Alliance's system. Yet, the Kingdom of the Elves refused, completely refusing without leaving any room for negotiation. Did the elves have no money? Even the undead wouldn't believe this. The elves' exclusive magical products and artwork were highly profitable businesses. Even robbery wouldn't be as fast as the elves. Plus, with the elves' many years of savings, who would believe that the elves were actually poor? Were the elves unwilling to pay for the road? The amount of money and magical resources needed to maintain a low-temperature magical barrier in the Northlands would be astronomical. The elven mages who were so extravagant that they could even walk on air lived such extravagant lives. How could they possibly be poorer than the human domain lords? Nobody was an idiot. But since the Kingdom of the Elves insisted that this area didn't belong to them, the elves had no obligation to pay for it. The Mist Alliance held a meeting for 3 consecutive days. In the end, for the sake of the Mist Alliance's internal unity, the elves gritted their teeth and paid for the road. And then, there was nothing else. After the road was constructed, strange things kept happening. Either a certain part of the road was suddenly haunted, or a certain part of the road was attacked by mounted bandits. The workers were chased away, and even their tools were stolen. More than 20 such incidents had happened in the past 3 months. Even an idiot would know that something was wrong with the situation. Yet the Mist Alliance's investigation team had returned on the very same night. It was quite obvious that the elves were the ones who had done this. What were the Moon Elves trying to do? The Mist Alliance's higher-ups were all confused. In the end, the former Moon Elf Princess Swanna told them the truth. The Moon Elves of the Northlands have always looked down on and feared humans. They're probably worried that they'll be devoured. All right then, the elves didn't say it directly. Instead, they used such an uncooperative attitude to express their distrust of humans. Perhaps this was the elves' typical petty and indirect, elegant diplomatic trick. This time, the problem was now the Mist Alliance's leaders. What could the human countries do next? Continue to forcefully construct the road? The elves were willing to pay for it. And the elves were willing to pay for it. Even if the elves were to wash their faces and try again, they wouldn't be able to accept it. Forcefully breaking through, forcefully interfering, and demanding that the Moon Kingdom of the Elves fulfill their alliance? The elves were being quite careful. Even if everyone knew that the elves were responsible for this, they wouldn't be able to obtain any evidence. And even if they obtained evidence, would they be able to use this as an excuse to attack the elves? Not only would that be breaking the alliance's agreement and making all the other countries feel threatened, it would also be an actual invasion. At this time, the reason why the Moon Elves had so easily joined the Mist Alliance in the first place was revealed. The Moon Elves had such a plan from the very start. Rather than forcefully resisting the Northland's unification, it would be better to join the Mist Alliance in name only and create their own small cliques. They would be independent and uncooperative. Actually, in the relatively direct and simple, political circles, this was already a brilliant move. This was the crystallization of the elves' thousands of years of political experience. It was indeed effective, but the elves have always been like this. They're always scheming, always looking at what's in the pot. They've obtained many benefits, but they're too scheming and don't want to give in at all. They're so short-sighted that they're blinded by immediate benefits that they lose everything in the end. The Tassel Kingdom of the Elves' road project had been stopped. The other kingdom of the Elves' other kingdoms hadn't even started. The Northlanders had witnessed the Mist Alliance's rapid development over the past few years. Only the elves were still living their own independent lives. Did the elves regret it? No, they won't regret it. They'll only celebrate for defeating the humans' plan to devour the elves yet again. As for the development of the outside world, that has nothing to do with them. They're still living 10,000 years in the past. Swanna's words were completely in line with my understanding of the elves. Even if the younger elves had objections, in the elven kingdoms, the elders had the most authority. Tradition was incredibly important. The final result was that the kingdom of the elves had won in a way. The elves had maintained their own expectations, but the humans hadn't lost. The Mist Alliance would still be able to advance without the elves. Their nominal alliance would allow the humans to purchase special products from the kingdom of the elves and send students to study there, which would still benefit them to a certain extent. The entire Mist Alliance was becoming more and more unified. The second phase of the Mist Alliance project, the Milky Way project, had already begun 2 years ago. However, the elves were the only exception. The first phase of the elves project hadn't even been completed yet, and yet they remained outside of the Mist Alliance. This had a terrible influence on the Mist Alliance. Since the Mist Alliance's leaders didn't have the time to play around with the elves, they could only let the elves do as they pleased. Although the elves had been able to endure it before, this time they were truly unable to do so. According to tradition, the Moon Elves and the Moon Kingdom of the Elves would become one of the 4 superior elf species in the new Northland's Elven Empire. But no matter what, the Moon Elves were the most skilled at scheming among the elves, and they were the ones with actual power in the new Northland's Elven Empire. They want the Northland's Elven Empire to establish Moonflower City as their capital. That isolated city, located at the southernmost tip of the Kingdom of the Elves' territory. They want the entire Northland's Elven Empire to be isolated from them. They want the Moon Elves to retain the Moon Elves' rights to their territory, since they're providing it to the Moon Elves. The Northland's Elven Empire's senators and guardians should be Moon Elves. The Empire hasn't even been established yet, and they're already intending to make the Empress a figurehead. The Moon Elves have a grudge against the Dark Elves. They want the Dark Elves to not step onto the new Northland's Elven Empire's territory. The 4 superior elf species, the Silver Elves, have only just arrived, and the Wood Elves don't have many members. Only the Dark Elves are strong enough. Are they intending to directly kick the other party out of power? They want independent diplomatic and military power. What's the difference between this and a civil war? Are the Moon Elves intending to start a civil war? I smiled as I slowly read out these documents. The elf tribe leaders in front of me were all trembling. The killing intent in the hall seemed to have solidified. In their eyes, what was going to happen next was going to be dozens of assassins jumping out and setting up a trap. I wasn't targeting anyone. In fact, I even smiled in a friendly manner at the Moon Elf representative Swanna, who was pushed out. Judging from how she retreated several steps, it seemed that she didn't have much confidence in me. Or had I accidentally revealed my intention to use my blade? Moon Elves, I helplessly tossed the documents to the side. I had long since expected that things would develop to this point, but I didn't expect it to happen so quickly. Previously, when Harloise had been crowned, the Northland's Moon Elves had been unable to elect a new Moon Elf leader. In the end, they could only have Swanna, who had already become a Greyblood Elf and an undead, become the new Moon Elf representative. Ever since then, the Moon Elves had probably decided that if they couldn't come to an agreement, they wouldn't even acknowledge the previous agreements. My suggestion at the time was also a chance to break out of this situation. I would give Swanna a chance to revive. Once she became a Moon Elf again, she would be incredibly famous. Perhaps she would be of great political use and change the current situation that was becoming more and more helpless. I had already lost all patience with the Moon Elf elders who had never experienced war and only knew how to fight amongst themselves. I was doing serious business, yet those bastards were holding me back. Swanna's reply to me at the time was that she needed more time to think things over. Fine, I would think things over, but I was too busy, so I abandoned her. And so, I did my best to maintain a friendly smile as I continued asking questions. Swanna, you've thought things over long enough. What's your final decision? To revive or to maintain your current state? I'll tell you beforehand that you'd better choose carefully. I've already lost all patience with the Moon Elves. I'm not threatening you. but your decision will affect the survival of all moon elves. I refuse to believe that the Northland's elven empire won't be able to survive with only 3 superior elves. Don't scare me. If this isn't a threat, then what is? Harlow's clone, who had been pretending to be a decoration, finally spoke up. The moon elf leaders all heaved sighs of relief. However, what she said next made them not know whether to laugh or cry. Actually, I really dislike the moon elves who always cause trouble. They were the ones who rebelled back in the day. Actually, I'm quite confident that the new Northland's elven empire will be able to develop quite well even with only 3 superior elves. Swana, don't worry and boldly refuse this idiot. None of the moon elf leaders said anything. However, their expressions were quite strange, as if they were holding back their panic. It was as if they were saying, "You've already said that. Refusing her will mean the death of the entire tribe. Who would dare to refuse her?" Chapter 668. The Chaos Abyss is glaring at us from the outside, and the Order faction is hostile against us. Even the Mist Alliance is having internal strife. We're in dire straits from both within and without. Could the situation get any worse? No, I can't say such a thing. According to my experience, every time you say, "Could it get any worse?" fate really will make things worse for you. Although I was sighing inside, I only habitually complained a little. In my past memories, this tattered ship that was full of holes had internal strife while still barely moving forward. That was the most normal situation. Everyone would shout, "Unite as one," and charge forward bravely, without any consideration for personal gains or losses. They would also be brave enough to sacrifice themselves for foresight. Such a situation only existed in epic fairy tales. If I truly saw such a situation, my first reaction would be to slap myself to see if I had accidentally fallen for an enemy's illusion. In my memories, the reality was that everyone would always have their own plans. Even when fighting against external enemies, they would still be scheming against their own superiors and subordinates. They would complain about how low their wages were and how tiring their work was while forcing themselves to advance under the direction of mutual benefits. Back in the day, it was the same for Sulphur Mountain City. We had personally established this city, and our foundations were already solid enough. It could be said that this could be considered a rare paradise in the underground. However, there was still a lot of fun going on inside. The Parliament and Judiciary factions were hostile against each other. When the outside world was threatened by the underground lords, large numbers of citizens and officials joined the enemy's side. The Parliament, which was one of the core powers of the underground, even rebelled. Forget it, let's not talk about it. I liked the Knight faction and the military. I admired the Knight faction's loyalty and fairness. One of the main reasons was that the Knight faction was relatively simple. At the very least, they had to be simple in this cruel era. The Moon Elves were no idiots. They were just used to treating other species like idiots. They were causing trouble for us at this time because they saw the overall situation. They knew that the Northland's elven empire was about to be reestablished. If we did a great cleansing of the Moon Elves at this time, it would definitely shake the hearts of the elves, which would have a great impact. That was why the Moon Elves took this opportunity to make a series of excessive demands, hoping to obtain benefits on the negotiation table that they wouldn't be able to obtain on the battlefield. If they really did as they wished, there would be no Northland's elven empire left. There would only be the Moon Elf Empire, and it would be an independent kingdom within the Mist Alliance. The Moon Elf Empress who had just sacrificed herself would probably cry or laugh in hell when she saw that the dream that she had been unable to achieve despite working so hard was being realized so easily on the negotiation table. Of course, I felt that even the most optimistic Moon Elf elders wouldn't believe that all of the Moon Elves' demands would be fulfilled. The Moon Elf elders had far too many bargaining chips, such as magical engineering, the undead, and beastmen. The Moon Elves had far too many demands, and they couldn't even begin. Either. The Moon Elves elders. They were only certain that the Mist Alliance wouldn't use force to clean up its internal affairs at this time. They were probably taking advantage of this opportunity to obtain as much political capital as possible. This could be described as extreme scheming, or perhaps it could also be described as bottomless greed. However, the Moon Elves never considered that in the past, the Mist Alliance had allowed the Moon Elves to act independently and in small groups. The first reason was that the Holy War hadn't even officially begun yet, and the newly established Mist Alliance's stability was the highest priority. The second reason was that the leaders of the Mist Alliance were relatively moderate factions like Renee and Galena. The Moon Elves had far too many chips in their hands, such as magical engineering, undead, and beastman's combat potential. The Moon Elves didn't care about the distant kingdom of the Elves at all, and right now, the Moon Elves' opponents were me, the person who had previously organized a major cleansing of Sulphur Mountain City, and the Gold Elf Harlowies, who hated Moon Elves the most. And no matter how you looked at it, we were far from being a moderate faction. There was nothing wrong with the strategy of first stabilizing the internal affairs. When an external enemy was a tremendous threat, it would be far easier for internal instability to cause problems. When the internal threat had already fused together with the body's internal organs, the moment it was eliminated, it would cause great damage to the body's internal organs. Naturally, it wouldn't be beneficial to use force. And right now, the Moon Elves were no longer part of the Mist Alliance's system. At most, they would be nothing more than a sore on their arm. Harlowies, I'll personally prepare a revival ritual to revive Swana. You'll personally handle the Moon Elves. Use the Dark Elves' manpower. It'll be more appropriate to use my name. I'm a professional scapegoat anyways. Clean up the house and welcome the new residents before the Elves' caravan arrives. Elven Butcher and Elven Destroyer have been on me for over 100 years already. Perhaps it would be nice to have a new title like Elven Executioner. I couldn't be bothered to argue with the Moon Elves anymore, since they still couldn't see the overall situation and our determination. Then let them be abandoned by the times. I would directly kill off the current Moon Elf leadership and have a Knight of Longblades or something like that. Then I would replace them with a new leader and give them some candy. I believed that Swana, who had an incredibly high reputation among the low-level elves, would be an excellent candidate. If I had any concerns before, I would probably have been concerned about how this would affect the entire Mist Alliance's reputation, as well as possibly causing the elves to panic about the humans. But now that all the elves would be involved, and I would be the scapegoat, there was nothing to worry about. Although rivers of blood would probably flow, what did that have to do with me? Please wait a moment. Many innocent people will be harmed. While the other tribe leaders remained silent, Swana stood up. Her entire body was covered in a faint white glow. The white light that kept spreading out indicated that she was extremely agitated. I chuckled. If she didn't stand up at such a time, she wouldn't be the Princess Swana that I knew. All right, Harlowies won't do anything. If she does, there'll definitely be rivers of blood. You can do it. You've been helping the elves and the Mist Alliance for the past few years. Those tumors need to be eliminated, and those that can remain, you should know. Swana paused in surprise. She hadn't expected that I would be so easy to talk to. Right after that, her spiritual body started trembling. She knew that although, in a way, she had saved her tribe, she had done so by accepting the butcher's knife. But I'll say this first. Don't try to be a good person. If you need me to do a second cleanup after you've dealt with the elves, then that'll truly be killing without mercy. After saying this, I directly walked out of the door. I didn't even spare the stunned elves a glance. Swana's back was glowing with a faint light. Her heart was in utter chaos. That was all I needed to say. The rest would be up to them. If the final cleanup wasn't to my satisfaction, and they continued to be a burden, not only would I not be able to eliminate all the Moon Elves, it would even be possible that they wouldn't be able to leave their tribe behind. Of course, I wouldn't indiscriminately massacre them. If things developed to that point, I would simply disperse the Moon Elves and have them live together with humans like the Greyblood Elves in the Tassel Kingdom. The Moon Kingdom of the Elves would become history. Is it really necessary? I really like that girl Swana. Is it really necessary to force her to such an extent? It's precisely because she's nice that I'm helping her cut off all her weakness and naivety. Huh, she's probably going to hate me. Of course, you're forcing her to stain her hands with blood and blood from her own tribe at that. Yet, you're still helping her become the Moon Elf tribe leader? You're basically pushing her to the top of a volcano. Even though she clearly only wants to live a peaceful life, she probably won't have a single good day in the future. This peaceful life? Is there still a peaceful life in this world? Ever since she was born into the royal family, she's enjoyed the royal treatment for so many years. Don't say such foolish things. Besides, isn't it all for your sake? Will she even be able to turn back now? She'll definitely become even closer to the Moon Elf Empress. Wipe out everything in one go. How would that be possible? Unless she was willing to massacre the Moon Elves, there would definitely be hidden dangers left behind. Not only that, Swana wasn't a cold-blooded and decisive leader. Not only would she massacre the Moon Elves, I estimated that at most, the Moon Elves' prisons would be overrun. And as long as the politicians weren't completely annihilated, there would definitely be many hidden dangers afterwards. However, at that time, the one who would have a headache would be Swana, the Moon Elf tribe leader. As for Harloise, she was the Moon Elf Empress who had appeared out of nowhere. She was probably most afraid of the superior elves being united as one. A united Moon Elf and Dark Elf alliance would become the rulers of the Elven Empire. It was unlikely that the Dark Elves would be united as one, while the Moon Elves were capable of working together. However, if they really rebelled, there wouldn't be any good ways to deal with them. Harloise took this opportunity to create an eternal rift between the Moon Elves. I wasn't making things up. Every few years, the Moon Elves would have internal strife, which would be a good thing for Harloise. Swana's position as the Moon Elf tribe leader would be unstable, and she wouldn't be able to count on the Moon Elves' power. Naturally, she would become closer to the Moon Elf Empress Harloise, which would help her eliminate a hidden danger. As if I'd believe you. Aren't you just trying to eliminate the Moon Elves? You've probably had enough already. It's good that you're good at scheming, but if you're always scheming, you'll probably never be satisfied, and you'll always have new demands. That's far too troublesome. I shrugged and didn't deny it. The Moon Elves were far too troublesome. I was already tired of playing schemes with them. I wanted to clean up everything in one go. You're still going a bit too far. That girl Swana is our only elf. It's so rare for her to be so pure. Naive? Pure? That would be a compliment in a time of peace, but since I was the leader of my tribe, naivety equated to stupidity, and purity equated to lack of experience. Neither of those were good words. Elf? Oh, you mean the natural undead? If that was the case, there weren't that many natural undead in the mortal plane right now, and they were all sly bastards. It was inconceivable that one would be so pure. However, I chuckled. Previously, you were right about the only elf apart from us, but that's no longer the case now. I looked towards the south, where 2 of the 5 undead emperors were also natural undead. No matter if it was in terms of experience or danger level, they were far above Roland and Harloise. This was especially true for the undead emperor who had instantly cast a forbidden spell. He had instantly reached the top 10 of the calamity rankings. How he had accomplished this was still the hottest topic in the mage country. I had obtained a great deal of information from conservation and Osso, so I indeed knew how he had accomplished this. This only made me feel that he was even more unfathomable. The South is so troublesome. I really don't want to meet those undead on the battlefield. But I'm afraid that some things are difficult to avoid. Chapter 669. This 3-story brick building was rather old and outdated. It was built in the style of 3 centuries ago. The steps on the building had been washed clean, but they still had the smell of time. The decorative murals depicted the heroic deeds of the Mist Kingdom's ancestors. The worn murals still had the smell of paint on them. This was the result of a recent renovation. In front of this building, under a pine tree, there was a flat garden and empty ground. The rusty brass railings sealed off this small world. There was still some green grass in the flower bed, but this time, only some withered grass and branches were left. Back in the day, I practiced my swordsmanship under this tree. This was a quiet corner of the Donglan Principality's imperial palace. This was also where I and a certain idiot lived back in the day. When I was confirmed to still be alive, Kelly opened up this dusty courtyard and had people clean it up and move in new furniture. 8 years ago, when I returned to the Northlands, this place was still under reconstruction. Kelly didn't tell me about it. This time, when I returned, the palace's butler, Kelly, directly arranged for me to return to this courtyard, which gave me a pleasant surprise. The building was the same as before, and the garden was the same as before. Even the iron railings still had scratches left behind when I compared the height of the two youths. By the way, we were twins now, so is there any meaning in comparing? I felt like my past memories had just happened yesterday. Looking at this scene that was almost identical to my memories, was this what it felt like to be home? However, the empty old scenery made me feel a little lonely, and I felt a little sad. I could no longer remember what my parents looked like, nor could I remember the lesson from back in the day. However, these rusty and scattered memories had survived because they weren't too important. Should I be happy? How annoying! Asterisk click. Asterisk, the rusty railings were opened, and a metallic sound interrupted my thoughts. I looked over to see that it was the current ruler of this palace, Her Highness Renee. You, who are you? Is it Big Brother Roland? I paused in surprise for a moment before coming to a realization. I hurriedly adjusted the time accessory and changed my physical body's age to around 20 years old. Oh, this is a small toy that Marguerite made. It can adjust your physical body's age. It was a perfect lie. Although everything I said was the truth, my actions and expression made it seem like I was saying that I was using this accessory to change my physical body's age. Rain slowly nodded as a strange smile appeared on her face, as if she had seen through everything. Damn it. I had forgotten that these ape-type creatures all use their muscles to think and their instincts to distinguish truth from falsehood. Oh, what's that? I seem to remember. Dusk fruit? Although I said it as a question, I sounded certain. After all, this fruit that looked like a grimacing skull was far too shabby. Although it tasted all right, I felt quite awkward every time I bit into it. I could sense that the designer of this fruit was filled with evil intentions. This was most likely Amelia's handiwork. I was regretting my decision. I had already ordered the guards to not let anyone else in, so that I could boldly eat the fruits here and get used to my new body. However, I hadn't considered how the palace's guards would be able to expel the master of the palace. It was likely that with a single gesture from her, the guards wouldn't even need to notify me. Well, at this point, what I'm doing hiding here alone is pretty much revealed. That's right, I was hiding here to eat the dusk fruit. The dusk fruit. However, the effects of the dusk fruit weren't something that could be accomplished in a single sitting. Every time I ate one, I would need to spend some time to adapt to the changes in my physical body. This was to prevent my physical body from changing too drastically, which would cause my soul and body to become incompatible. I also had to prevent myself from eating too many dusk fruits in one sitting and turning into a magical version of Urashimataro. It had already been half a month since the dusk fruit began, and I had only eaten 10 dusk fruits. That was an increase of 50 years. But to be honest, I had already given up on this bloodline. When I looked in the mirror, I felt like I was in the 4th grade of elementary school, and that I was still far away from graduating from elementary school. However, these dusk fruits were indeed effective. I could feel that my limbs were much stronger than before, and my mind seemed to be much clearer. If I use my system to explain this, then my 50 years of age meant that I had obtained the effects of strength +1 and intelligence +1. This was a tremendous improvement. Every time I asked my damn system how old my bloodline would be when it would reach adulthood, it would always mysteriously change the topic or play dumb, which made me feel even more uneasy. From a certain standpoint, this world was still somewhat fair. The more powerful a bloodline was, the more difficult it would be for it to reproduce, and the more time it would take for it to reach adulthood. Dragons, titans, and giants were the best examples. Elves would also take 100 or 200 years to reach adulthood, while gold elves with a gold bloodline would take 1,000 or 2,000 years to reach adulthood. I felt more and more that the moon elves were bastards back in the day. They actually dared to bully a girl whose father had died before she reached adulthood. A silver bloodline would take 100 or 200 years to reach adulthood. Many gold bloodlines would take more than 1,000 years to reach adulthood. As for diamond bloodlines, theoretically speaking, it would be quite normal for a double diamond bloodline to take more than 10,000 years to reach adulthood. Venerated goddess, if it really takes more than 10,000 years to reach adulthood, believe it or not, I'll take you down with me. What were you thinking back then? Tisk, you're trying to push the blame on me now? Back in the day, who was the one who went around searching for the strongest bloodline? I kindly added my and Cynthia's bloodline into your bloodline. You should be grateful. These words didn't make me happy at all. Instead, I felt even more despair. I knew that something was wrong with this situation. The goddess of creation's bloodline had been casually given to me by her. It couldn't be 100,000 years of adulthood, right? If so, what was the point of having a powerful bloodline? Let's not talk about the increase in strength after adulthood. I've been single for more than 300 years. Don't tell me you're really planning to cheat me for tens of thousands of years. I don't think so. Cynthia and I were already adults when we were born. Back then, I didn't think that I would turn you into this. It was rare for my system to have a guilty conscience in her words, as if she had revealed some secret to me. So it turned out that my current state wasn't because she intentionally tricked me, but because it was an unexpected accident. However, I couldn't bring myself to be happy about this. From another perspective, the situation had completely spiraled out of control, which meant that I couldn't count on my system at all. I was even more displeased. But what was surprising was that the system actually took the initiative to admit defeat. Don't be like that. I can actually compensate you. Weren't you looking for the spring of the drowned woman? I can give you one. You can do that as well. Wait a moment. I wasn't looking for the spring of the drowned woman. It was Kolos who was looking for the spring of the drowned man. It's the same. In the words of my previous world, it's just changing a person's stats. It's quite simple. But if you help me with something, I'll give you the quest reward. Reward. What? I was rather astonished. This was the first time that my system had given me a quest of her own volition. I could sense the anxiety in her voice. Just what could make the creator goddess of chaos so nervous? Could it be that my next quest was to challenge a chaos main god? Or was it to poach a supreme, immemorial dragon king? Help me pour the spring of the drowned woman on that subordinate of yours. I can sense that those elves and divine beasts are currently giving birth to terrifying creatures. This world is chaotic enough as it is. I absolutely can't allow even stranger creatures to be born. Absolutely not. Why would such a bastard appear in this world? I can't take it anymore. He's definitely not one of my creations. I was astonished. Vayphone was far too inconceivable. He was actually able to make the creator goddess of chaos scream so hysterically. It would seem that his descendants were creatures that greatly defied common sense and normal aesthetics. At that time, two magic bottles suddenly appeared out of thin air, one blue and one red. Even the quest item and reward were given to me in advance. This didn't seem like the petty system at all. It would seem that she had truly been astonished by the top of the calamity rankings. Using the spring of the drowned woman on Bayphone, just imagining that scene would be indescribably beautiful. And why did I feel that even if he was changed by the spring of the drowned woman, my system would still fail, and he would still be blinded in the end? Still, there was no harm in trying. At any rate, I wouldn't be the unlucky one. As for refusing, I kept thinking about it, but couldn't find a reason to refuse. This would be so interesting. Cough. I meant that I was doing justice for the heavens. Perhaps I could even be removed from the calamity rankings because of this. Brother Roland, are you practicing your sword techniques? Renee's words brought me back to my senses. However, I carefully glanced at the red and blue bottles in my dimensional storage again. If these two bottles broke, it would be quite a joke. Rain's question was still echoing in my ears, so I nodded my head in response. What other explanation could there be for this half-naked person standing in the middle of an empty space other than practicing swordsmanship? Could it be that I could explain that I was afraid of accidentally transforming into my clothes? I nodded, but Renee had a delighted expression. In that case, Brother Roland, let me practice with you. I've improved quite a bit over the past few years. I glanced at my surroundings and then smiled. Then I nodded as I said, I refuse. I'm not going to fight against an idiot who can't completely control his power. If his power leaks out, this entire courtyard will be destroyed. This place is incredibly important to me, I didn't need to say the second half of my sentence. I unhesitatingly refused. Seeing how Renee didn't hesitate to hide her disappointment, I actually felt rather happy. Right, Brother Roland, I heard that you're going to revive Insuna. This was probably why she had come to find me. I nodded. Since she had already begun her preparations, it was only natural that everyone was talking about it. I heard that only natural undead can be revived. Renee's eyes were filled with expectation. It seemed that she wanted to get a different answer from me. I frowned. I pretty much knew why she had come here. You want to revive your family? Yeah. I can't do it. No other existence can. Several minutes later, I became even more afraid as I watched Renee's dispirited and disappointed figure. Indeed, I hadn't lied, but I hadn't told the complete truth either. At the very least, I had lied about the natural undead's limitations. My revival abilities were far stronger than what I had shown them. Renee had a strong will, but even she couldn't resist the temptation of reviving her family. If I had told her that I could revive a person who had died for a short period of time, then the entire world would probably have gone insane. Countless powerful individuals and kings whose family had just died or were about to die would come looking for trouble with me. Fortunately, I made preparations in advance. However, I still need to be prepared to deal with trouble. Even if I told her about the limitations of reviving, there would always be people who would see through my lies. Or there would be people who hoped that it was possible to revive their family members. As long as 10 level 4 existences like that came, they would definitely be quite fierce. I would still be in quite a bit of trouble. In that case, let's make this revival even grander. Make it so grand that the vast majority of people won't be able to afford it. Chapter 670. It was still the same familiar building, and it was still the same uninvited guest. However, this guest made me want to scream for help. On the other side of the tea table was a sleepy old man. His snow-white beard reached the soles of his feet, and his slovenly appearance was somewhat similar to that of a tramp. However, the magic power under that old and decrepit body was as deep as the sea. I could feel the endless magic power as I sat across from him. However, not a single ripple could be seen outside the room. Yonya? What a perfect life form. The old man put down his teacup and slowly looked at the tea in his hand. It seemed that he was quite satisfied with the tea. However, I knew that countless pairs of eyes were staring right at me. Lord of Withering, Sandro was the ruler of the Corpse Plane. He was an undead emperor who was even more experienced than Aso. He had previously been the chief senator of the Tark Republic, and this time he was the most prestigious undead emperor among all the undead emperors who had come to this plane. Not long ago, Sandro had shown off his inconceivable ability to instantly cast a forbidden spell in front of the mage country's archmages. However, only those who understood Sandro's field of research would know that it wasn't a forbidden spell at all. It was just a regular spell with the power of a forbidden spell. Right now, Sandro should be fighting against the archmages and dragons at the front lines of Bardi. Yet, he had silently appeared in front of me. I had just received combat reports 2 days ago that he was currently patrolling the front lines. It would seem that either he had the ability to teleport over a large area, or he had fooled everyone. Sandro had never opened his eyes before, but his soul eyes were able to see through everything. The perfect life form he mentioned probably referred not only to his physical body, but also to his soul. While Sandro was sizing me up, I was also doing my best to analyze his existence. Withered One, Waterless Dust, Corpse Spider Emperor. Every undead emperor had reached maturity by stepping over countless corpses. I didn't dare to be careless in the slightest when facing such an opponent. Senior, why have you come here? To revive? Sandro was also a natural undead. It would make perfect sense if he had come here for this. However, Sandro shook his head and didn't say anything. His smile seemed to be mocking me, as if I had underestimated him. The living belong to the sunlight, while the dead return to the dust. I'm not one of those juniors who yearn for the past. So why would I be obsessed with life and death? I've come to find you for the promise you mentioned before. Promise? I paused in surprise. It wasn't that I didn't promise anything. It was that I had promised far too many random promises. On the battlefield, Most of my promises to my enemies were just nonsense meant to sway them. When I had expressed my goodwill to the Tark Republic, I had also promised many IOUs. I didn't even know which one I had promised. But very soon he thought about it. For Sandro to put down his important matters and come over, the person must be of a higher level. Then there was only one possibility. Land? Sandro nodded slowly, which doubtlessly confirmed my guess. I was actually rather astonished. I had only suggested a dimension outside of the mortal plane. No matter how I looked at it, the undead emperors who had sworn to conquer the mortal plane would only be a backup plan. I expected that they would come looking for me after they suffered setback. Now that the undead army was at its peak, they were already looking for a way out. I didn't hide my astonishment because I also needed an explanation from Sandro. You've done an excellent job, really. You've done so well that we've even begun to disagree. I felt like I needed a translator. Sandro loved to say things that didn't make sense and then have people guess. If he guessed correctly, it would be natural. If he guessed incorrectly, it would make me seem foolish. Oh, all right, old geezer, I'll play along with you. Let's all guess together. I had a calm expression as I said this, and then I shut my mouth. The room fell into an abnormal silence. Cough, cough, Phil, help me out. It seemed that Sandro couldn't stand the situation any longer. His subordinate walked out from his shadow. He was a middle-aged gentleman dressed like a mummy. Your Majesty Yongya, greetings. My lord hasn't spoken for far too many years. Please allow me to express his words. Far too many years of silence. That was understandable. After all, undead of a lower power level would only need to use their thoughts to give orders. As for undead of a higher power level, even if Sandro wanted to communicate with other undead emperors, it was likely that he could directly send his subordinates. It seemed that he didn't like to speak in riddles. Rather, it was simply that he had too few opportunities to speak, which caused his ability to speak to deteriorate. This was truly a problem of extravagance. I nodded, indicating that Sandro could do as he pleased. My lord, what you mean is that you've done far too well. We can't believe that the undead are actually able to live together so harmoniously with the living. This reminds us of the Tark Republic's golden age. That's why the undead emperors had different opinions about how to treat the living. The mummy named Phil didn't seem like his kin at all. He was quite eloquent, and I gradually understood Sandro's situation as I listened to his description. It was far different from my previous guesses. The senators of the Tark Republic had different opinions about how to return to the mortal plane. Some undead emperors desired to rebuild the Tark Republic. Some only wanted to come to the mortal plane to harvest souls and flesh, and some didn't even intend to return to the mortal plane. Even the senators of the Tark Republic had a completely different attitude towards the living. In that case, their way of doing things would be completely different as well. Let's use an individual as an example. Aso was one of the core members of the Tark Republic faction. However, his attitude towards the living was much gentler. He hoped that he could establish a new Tark Republic where the living and the undead could live together and return to civilization. As for undead Emperor Sandro, he was also a veteran senator who had lived together with the living and the undead. His political views were similar, and he was basically a staunch supporter of the Tark Republic. However, even Conservation, who was quite close to Aso, was also a staunch supporter of the Tark Republic faction. However, she was filled with hostility towards the living. Originally, she didn't have a strong desire to return to the mortal plane, but recently, she had been completely focused on taking revenge. She had even intended to establish a country for the undead in the mortal plane. Thanks to her greatly improved personal power level, she faintly became the leader of the Tark Republic faction. However, after entering the mortal plane, whether or not to use undead calamity to slaughter and transform all the living into the undead directly caused the undead calamity to clash. There's only so many people, yet there are so many factions and disagreements. You've all worked hard. I couldn't see Phil's expression due to his bandages. However, old Sandro had a fatigued expression, as if he also had a headache. It can't be helped. Those undead emperors are all one of a kind. I nodded. Of course I could understand. Those undead emperors who were able to surpass the theoretical limits to become undead emperors were all extremely paranoid. And paranoid undead emperors were extremely self-centered and difficult to compromise with. Not only that, these undead emperors were all supreme existences who ruled over entire planes or continents by themselves. Not to mention, they were all mages who looked down on the gods. It would be strange if they were easy to get along with after so many years. I had previously speculated that since they were all mages, the undead emperors would probably have a method similar to the Truth Symposium's alliance system. Every undead emperor was an authority in their own domain. Naturally, they would all be paranoid undead emperors who wouldn't listen to others. Only mutual benefits would make them work together. There was no such thing as superiors or subordinates. It would be impossible to convince anyone else. As for other powerful existences, they could use their power level to distinguish who was superior and who was inferior. However, mages of the same power level had very little to do with power level. After all, who would have the greatest strength to be the boss? That would be just like the barbarians that the undead emperors looked down on the most. Not only that, many times the outcome of a magic battle wasn't just a battle of power, but also a battle of wits. Luck would also play an important role. If the order in which they attacked changed, the result would be completely different. It was quite possible that two undead emperors with similar power levels would have a completely different result if they fought again at a different time. Even if the undead emperors used power level to compare, it was possible for anyone to break through a bottleneck in their own domain. Then their power level would explosively increase, and then the result would change. Constantly changing rankings would be nothing more than a joke. The most difficult people to deal with in the world are probably dictators and crazy and paranoid scientists. The undead emperors are both. It's already a miracle that they're able to get along with each other peacefully. Perhaps it's because they used to be friends with each other, but there seems to be a gap between them. All in all, I deduced that the undead emperor's alliance would definitely be an extremely loose alliance. All the undead emperors would have nearly equal statuses, which was why I was in disbelief when I heard that they were actually working together to defeat the Bardi Empire. 5 undead emperors like me and Harlois working together to play mahjong? It's possible for us to get along? Dream on. My prediction of the undead emperors was that each of them would lead an army, open up a dimensional door, and attack an entire country. Anything they defeated would belong to them. This was the most suitable battle strategy for them. His Majesty Aso and Her Majesty Conservation are both gone. It's already impossible for the undead emperors to come to an agreement on who should be the main attackers. So, under His Majesty Shupna's suggestion, the 5 undead emperors decided to work together. This is the first time they've worked together, but judging from the results, it's likely that this will be the last. It turned out that the Tark Republic spies had been roaming the Northlands for the past few years. The veteran undead emperors were quite tempted by how the Mist Alliance's undead and living interacted with each other. The veteran undead emperors suggested that the Mist Alliance's undead shouldn't have any blood feuds with the living, leaving room for reconciliation. However, the irascible Shupnus tossed out an undead calamity right from the start, which then snowballed. Shupnus was quite accurate in his judgment. He knew that there were some things that would be impossible to turn back from once you cross the line. The undead emperors who were on the side of harmony saw that there was nothing they could do about the situation. They weren't exactly kind-hearted people, so they wouldn't show any mercy to their enemies. And so, everyone worked together to defeat the undead calamity. It was quite fun to just defeat the undead emperors. But halfway through, the undead emperors began to split up. Undead Emperor Anne, who felt that it was enough to just obtain a large amount of souls from the undead emperors, requested to go harvest souls from weaker countries instead of the Bardi Empire. She was only average among the undead emperors, and she needed a tremendous amount of souls to strengthen herself. From a certain standpoint, she was the only undead emperor who truly desired war. The undead emperor who heard that the great demon empire had actually returned from the dead was furious and wanted to go all out against the great demon empire. He had also experienced the great demon empire's era. Just like Aso, he came from the desecration plane. From a certain standpoint, he was both Aso's brother and Aso's subordinate. It should be mentioned that Sandro also really wanted to go make trouble for the Great Demon Empire. Of all the veteran senators of the Tark Republic, which one of them hadn't crawled out from a bloody battle between humans and the Great Demon Empire? The blood feud between the Great Demon Empire and the Great Demon Empire had long since become irreconcilable. In fact, the Great Demon Undead Emperor's current goal was to fight his way to the Bardi capital. The Great Demon Undead Emperor Shupnus from the Death Fog Plane was the youngest undead emperor of the Tark Republic in terms of both physical appearance and personality. He was unable to understand why the other undead emperors were so obsessed with the Great Demon Empire. He had a good relationship with conservation, and both of them wanted to establish a country of the undead. Shupnus' current goal was to fight his way to the Bardi capital. Undead Emperor Sonoma from the Blood Curtain Plane was probably the strangest of the undead emperors. Nobody knew what he was thinking. He had left without saying goodbye on the way to the Bardi capital, leaving only an incarnation behind. It was precisely because he had left by himself that the undead emperors were at a disadvantage in a magical battle. And the last undead emperor was Grandpa Sandro. His choice, he had already arrived in front of me. Plus, he was a member of the undead emperor's faction who was in the peace faction. The undead emperors are all so unique. Although Phil still had no expression on his face, I could hear that he was about to cry. Indeed, the undead emperors were divided into 5 factions. They didn't even care about their allies and did as they pleased. Their personalities were indescribably unique. Actually, I could already sense that the undead emperors would probably split into several factions with the same number of undead emperors. The final result would be the same. You've all worked so hard. It was truly pitiful to be the subordinate of such an incredibly egotistical group of bastards. My words were quite sincere. They were filled with sympathy and understanding. It's good that you understand. As expected of the only new undead emperor in recent times. The mummy Phil had an expression of gratitude, as if he could see the light of the future. You finally understand how hard we've worked? Do you still remember Sulphur Mountain from back in the day? Harlowe sent me a message through our soul connection. Would you really give up if you didn't comment on me? At the very least, I'm better than these bastards. I recalled the Sulphur Mountain city of the past, and all sorts of scams and explosions flashed through my mind. Causing trouble for my subordinates? I recalled the scene of Diana vomiting blood in anger over and over again. The more I spoke, the quieter my voice became, and the less confident I sounded. Cough, if only Hung and Aso were still here. As long as Aso was still here, we could probably still sit down and talk. Sandro's tone was filled with helplessness, as if he himself felt rather embarrassed. From a certain standpoint, this couldn't be blamed entirely on the Undead Emperor's poor coordination. Aso was the one who had organized the Undead Emperor's alliance. Now that the organizer was no longer here, there was nothing that could be done about this. I finally understood. It turned out that the Undead Emperors attacking with their full strength wasn't because they were decisive. It was because they knew that the longer this battle dragged on, the more the Undead Emperor's alliance would collapse. While they could still fight, the Undead Emperors would win in a single wave. If the Undead Emperors couldn't stop the Undead Emperors would win in a blink of an eye. If the Undead Emperors managed to stop the Undead Emperors, it would be game over. Now that Bardi had just stopped the Undead Emperors, the 5 Undead Emperors had 5 different ideas and 5 different actions. Not even the God of Fate would know what would happen next. I felt that the silent Sandro before me was becoming friendlier. It was obvious that he wasn't representing the Undead Emperor's alliance, but rather himself. He said that the living and the undead in the Mist Alliance had a good relationship with each other. This doubtlessly indicated his attitude. Perhaps this was a once-in-a-lifetime breakthrough. Chapter 671. Splitting Apart? The undead had never been united to begin with, much less splitting apart. As a mage, they would forever pursue the endless truth. They would maintain a certain level of respect and friendliness towards other archmages. This was because they were all the same in the pursuit of the truth. On the surface, they would only show respect to the gods out of respect for their powerful strength and to avoid trouble. A pure mage would never truly lower their head to any powerful existence. The enemy's strength would only attract their interest and curiosity. They would analyze, imitate, and learn from the enemy's source of strength in order to become even more powerful than the enemy. A true mage would never devoutly believe in a god. That's because a true mage will only be curious about the god's source of power. They'll firmly believe that as long as they can analyze the god's source of power, they'll become even more powerful than the god. Then, they'll send the god to their dissection table to verify the results of their research. Truth Symposium Archmage Desecrator 11. The Helletum generation was probably the most excessive when it came to this. Even if the Helletum generation was able to reverse time and explore the mysteries of the cycle of reincarnation and the soul, they would still end up walking down this path. The Tark Republic, the undead country, had also reached a dead end because of this. That was why mage organizations were usually loosely organized. This was something determined by their very nature. It would be quite difficult for mages to go any further if they were researchers who offered their bodies and souls to imperial power. The reason? In the world of magic, knowledge equaled power. The foundation of research and exploration was suspicion and analysis. If one lost the ability to question everything, how could they possibly break through the mist and discover new knowledge? Such a loosely organized alliance would also be impossible to have a strict hierarchy of superiors and subordinates. At most, the alliance would be formed based on a certain senior's reputation and connections. Obviously, such an alliance wouldn't be able to pass the test of time. Aso's early departure caused this alliance to lose its most important core member. The undead emperors all knew that it was only a matter of time before they all went their own ways. That was why they had chosen this method of helplessly joining forces. And the moment they were stopped, it would be the day that they would all go their own ways. In that case, everything that I could do was right in front of me. Even though I'm personally witnessing it, I still don't dare to believe it. Right now, we were only secretly sneaking out of the royal palace and wearing thick white wolf fur capes as we strolled around the streets. What astonished the undead emperor wasn't the high-level magical engineering products. Rather, she was astonished by a street vendor's business. The vendor was a high-level undead skeleton who was currently promoting his bone-style accessories and children's toys. Meanwhile, the buyer was an ordinary citizen who had no power at all. The two sides were haggling over the price so much that they were practically spitting saliva at each other. The high-level skeleton was clearly able to kill the other party with a single slap, but it was still smiling and explaining its design concept and cost to them. The buyers were obviously tempted, but they still tried to lower the price. This was actually a very common scene of trading goods. But this kind of business between the living and the dead was probably not seen in other areas. How is this possible? That skeleton general was really trying to get into those women's good books, even though he could have easily killed them. And those women aren't afraid at all. I could understand Sandro's mentality. For people like us, no matter how extravagant the information and spies told us, we would always be skeptical until we personally witnessed it. Oftentimes, even if we personally witnessed it or heard it, we still wouldn't believe it to be true. But this time, Sandro had suddenly visited Sandro. Thanks to an undead emperor's understanding of soul wavelengths, it was impossible for him to deceive the souls before him. This seemingly simple business scene proved one thing. In Definder, the living and the undead were all ordinary citizens. In their own minds, there was no foundational difference. In this generation where power represented everything, and in this world where the undead were equal to evil, Sandro found this scene even more incomprehensible than a forbidden spell. I believe that this scene was one of a kind and unprecedented in history. In the past, there have been cases where the undead and the living coexisted in the same country. However, no matter if it was the ancient Tark Republic or our Shua Empire, the undead and the living were never the same. Although the undead and the living both originated from the same country, they lived on two parallel lines that didn't interfere with each other. In Shiloh, most of the living were slaves and the lower social class. The higher-ups were all undead. During the Dark Republic's era, most people chose to cultivate undead magic. Political leaders and high-level officials also went missing, choosing to become undead mages. Becoming a high-level undead was actually a way for the living to become famous. It could be said that the undead still controlled and enslaved the living in both countries. The natural difference between the undead and the living made it incredibly unimaginable for them to coexist peacefully. How did you do it? This was the same question I had asked when we first met, but I fell silent. After all, it was indeed a miracle that I was able to reach this point. It was a miracle created by many coincidences and certainties. It was impossible to replicate. Let's talk as we walk. As we walked deeper into the business district, we saw that it was still quite flourishing even though it had already snowed several times. The temperature had long since dropped below zero. Even the carriages had stopped moving. However, there was still an endless stream of vehicles selling and buying goods on the streets. In the past, the business district would have long since closed for business at this time. After all, it would be impossible to do many transactions by relying solely on human labor. Goods that couldn't be transported would only be a burden and wouldn't even be considered goods. But now, we were walking past hastily. For them, the year-end/early year sales had only just begun. Some of them were riding snow versions of iron horses, motorcycles. Some of them were using tracked wagons. However, even more of them were using the best-selling products of the Ghost Carriage Company. Skeleton horses, ghost horses, and zombie horses were nightmares for the living. Now, they were pulling sleds, wagons, and carriages that didn't know what fatigue was. In Defender, the competition between magical engineering and undead magic for transportation was becoming fiercer and fiercer. Normally, ordinary horse carriage companies would be able to participate in the competition. However, it was currently winter, and it would be better for horses to stay in a warm stable for the winter. It would be quite a waste of medicine to treat frostbite. Since iron horses relied on magic to travel, they didn't have the problem of stalling in winter. There were also many snow variants of iron horses. The goblins, who were skilled at making money, had long since introduced a special winter model. However, their relatively high production cost meant that they were at a disadvantage in the civilian market. Meanwhile, a skeleton carriage controlled by an undead acolyte, with 2 zombie laborers attached, could be hired for a day for only 3 gold coins, which was much cheaper than the iron horse, which was sold for at least 500 gold coins. Unknowingly, this carriage had already taken over 70% of the winter transportation market. Since undead magic had low talent requirements and low learning costs, there were more and more civilian undead mages in Defender, where it was legal to study undead magic. The price of hiring undead mages was even decreasing. I heard that the undead mages were currently discussing whether or not they should establish a guild to regulate the price of undead magic. I silently traveled the entire way and became distracted. However, Sandro seemed to have realized something when he saw the scene before him. Link undead magic to the common people's benefits in order to eliminate their unease? That's indeed a good idea. However, the Dark Republic did the same thing back in the day, but the effects were far inferior. I shook my head. Common benefits weren't the crux of this. It was only the result of the undead being accepted by the common people. I would have a headache if this scene before me caused the undead to be mixed up. How should I put it? This is probably a coincidence that can't be replicated, but also a type of necessity. My thoughts returned to the past. Everything had probably started on that day. The defeated undead knight army raised their tattered battle flags and hesitantly returned to their homeland. However, they were accepted and welcomed by the Defender citizens who still remembered the will of the Mist. This was an opportunity as well as a miracle. Out of nostalgia for the Mist country and respect for the historical heroes, as well as respect for this undead knight, the Mist royalties guarantee, and my personal return, the Mist citizens accepted this undead army. The Undead Knight Army was once a member of the Mist Country's Royal Knight Squadron. They deeply loved this land and regretted not protecting their citizens in the past. How could they possibly harm the living? And for the living, these Undead Knight Army were heroes who had protected their country in the past. Under Princess Renee's guidance, these heroic knight returned together with Prince Roland. The living only knew respect and trust. Trust required the hard work of both sides. Their accidental return achieved the best result. The dead began to be accepted by the living. But just this wasn't enough. As the Undead Knight Squadron became more active, the Royal Knight Army spread out to various core industries in the Mist Country, such as alchemy, military affairs, winter hunts, and even construction. These Guardian Knights' activity greatly improved the citizens' lives, as well as greatly improved the relationship between the living and the dead. Using this as an opportunity to spread the knowledge of the undead, the Ancestral Knight Army continued to protect their own reality, eliminating the Mist Country's prejudice against the undead. This made Definder a holy land in the dreams of all undead mages. Countless undead mages traveled thousands of kilometers to come here. As for why it was called a miracle, it was because the subsequent developments met with a miracle. The establishment of the Sinless City allowed even unfamiliar undead to be proven innocent. Only after the people of the world no longer had prejudice against the undead could friendship and trust be established. Only after that did the benefits brought about by the great development of undead magic, as well as the open practice of undead mages. Only then did the living and the dead get along as equals. It could be said that this scene was the result of countless coincidences, including Wumian's miracles. But it was also inevitable. Without the return of my knight army, without the adorable citizens who accepted the Ancestral Knight Army, and without the Mist War flag that had protected this land for thousands of years, this miracle wouldn't have been possible. I had no intention of hiding these things. As I spoke, Sandro fell silent as well. He was thinking, recalling, and making an important decision in his heart. Replicate such a scene in other places? That's impossible in the short term. However, this land doesn't reject the undead. You've seen it for yourself. In that case, what do you think of the Tark Republic? This will directly affect our future choices. If you think that the Tark Republic is a country for the elderly, and that only by conquering a country for the undead can we be considered to have revived the Tark Republic, then there's nothing for us to discuss. If you think that the past civilization is a type of cultural inheritance, then perhaps there's plenty of room for us to communicate. Chapter 672. Negotiations were essentially about compromising. Both sides would pay a certain price to reach an agreement. That was why, in a negotiation, if one accidentally revealed one's own territory, one would be forced into a passive position. And if the other side blocked the crucial part of the negotiation, it would be only natural that one would lose. In that case, the moment that I learned of Sandro's desires, I was already destined to have the upper hand in this negotiation. Since our bargaining chips weren't equal, it would be impossible for me to lose. Sandro needed my help, and I didn't care if he didn't exist. Our unequal negotiating position not only gave me the upper hand, but also allowed me to state any price I wanted. At the very least, I know that Aso definitely doesn't desire a country of the undead. He spent so much effort to corrupt all of Bardi in order to create a country where both the living and the undead could coexist. A pure country of the undead wouldn't be able to last long in the mortal plane. A country of the undead would break the cycle of reincarnation from the very start, cutting off the source of belief. Even if the gods could tolerate it, the natural balance of this land would eventually collapse. The undead emperors were mages, so it was impossible for them not to have researched such things. Even during the Tark Republic's prime, the undead emperors weren't foolish enough to transform everyone into undead. That would be the equivalent of cutting off the entire country's future and hope. In that case, there's only one way for you to revive the Tark Republic. Rather than working so hard to conquer a territory and then using countless years and goodwill in exchange for peace with the humans, why don't you just join me? After all, the Mist Alliance has already accepted the Shiloh Empire, so why can't we have another Tark Republic? In normal situations, reviving the Tark Republic would first require victory in the Holy War, obtaining a piece of land amidst the vicious battle between order and chaos, and then establishing a new country. After establishing a new country, the undead emperors would also need to consider their relationship with other species, as well as the attitude of the newly born gods. The undead emperors would definitely be at the myth level. Those old undead emperors would definitely be powerful enough to threaten the gods and main gods. The main god conservation definitely wouldn't be the most difficult undead emperor to deal with. From what I knew, Sandro was far more dangerous than 10 conservations combined. But even if the undead emperors worked together, even the most optimistic scenario wouldn't guarantee victory in the Holy War. The undead army was incredibly powerful. They had high-level, strategic weapons and an endless supply of cannon fodder. Their greatest weakness was the living's natural hostility towards the undead. It would be impossible for them to have sufficiently strong allies. The giants would have to worry about being turned into bone giants by the undead. The dragons would naturally be hostile towards the undead because they were bone dragons. The gods were even more hostile towards the undead who broke the cycle of reincarnation and wasted belief. Right now, the undead still didn't have a stable territory. They were still in a weak position. The entire world still didn't take them seriously enough. In fact, the undead were even viewed as chess pieces that could be used. But if the undead really managed to occupy enough territory and reestablish the undead empire, which was a positive trend, then the entire world would become the undead's enemy. The Shiluo Empire was the most qualified to say this. After so many years, not only did the Shiluo Empire not have a single ally, other countries were still hostile towards the Shiluo Empire even when their entire territory was a desert or swamp where the living were forbidden. The Shiluo Empire was always on guard against the Shiluo Empire. As long as the Shiluo Empire dared to attack any human country, they would definitely be greeted by a righteous, allied army. This wasn't fair, but it was the truth. Compared to racial discrimination, discrimination against the living and the undead was something that was only natural and absolutely righteous. The undead and undead mages' actions throughout history also gave the Shiluo Empire sufficient evidence to support this discrimination and prejudice. Unless we also find a no man's land, it's impossible for the undead empire to reestablish itself. I refuse to believe that any wise undead emperor wouldn't be able to see this. However, an existence capable of overcoming the theoretical impossibility and becoming an undead emperor had managed to find a method. That's right, it was Aso. Aso's plan was quite comprehensive. He slowly made his plans, and then he would invade a certain country like a parasite. He would then use that country's shell to develop international relations. The living and the undead would live together, and the undead would gradually become the country's backbone. This would make other countries tacitly acknowledge the undead's existence and lower the level of hostility. Then, when the time was right, he would change the undead's skin. Wasn't this quite similar to establishing a fake government in an enemy country? Indeed, it was the same thing in terms of reducing hostility and variables. But now this was no longer possible. It could be said that the moment that Aso collapsed meant that the undead invasion had mysteriously failed. And as I analyzed Aso's memories and knowledge, not only did I feel more and more admiration for him, I also understood why Aso had given me all of his memories. The mage country's Cloud Tower's nuclear bomb aimed directly at the True Symposium, the alchemy formula capable of transforming Bardi citizens into undead, the control over Orlos, and the list of spies among the various countries' higher-ups who were tempted by the undead and tempted by the undead. These were all major killing machines. It was obvious what would happen if they fell into the hands of an ambitious schemer. For Aso, this was a gamble. It was a gamble of, since there's no worse choice, why don't I just toss the nuclear button to another undead emperor and try it out? It was a gamble with no chance of losing. If I was a normal undead emperor, no. As long as I was an undead lord like Harlois, no. Even if I was an ordinary human, just imagining what I would do after obtaining these chips was enough to terrify me. I would take over Aso's information network in the Bardi Empire and carry out a large-scale transformation of the entire country into undead. I would then use my control valve to control Emperor Orlos, directly taking control of the entire Bardi kingdom. I would also be able to use a nuclear bomb to kill all the mage countries' higher-ups, completely eliminating the most dangerous external threat. And then, and then all I would have to do was wait for the Holy War to truly arrive. Various undead emperors would descend, and the undead calamity would arrive. During this process, I would obtain many benefits. In fact, I would even be able to take control of the strongest country in the entire continent and become a supreme ruler. But by then, the Tark Republic would have a stable foundation and would have more than half successfully revived. The Tark Republic would also have a golden start, and the undead emperors wouldn't miss out on such an excellent opportunity. The possibility of the Tark Republic splitting apart would also be greatly reduced, and Aso's dream would be realized. This wasn't a random guess of mine. As I analyzed Aso's memories, not only did I find the reason why my analysis was so slow, I also found the key that Aso had set up for me: the desire for greater power and authority. Desire power and an even higher status. I shall give you the bargaining chips and power to become the ruler of the Bardi Empire. This sounded quite Shinibu, but this was the key that Aso had set up for me. And when such a treasure was right in front of them, how many people would be able to resist their instincts? Desiring more power and authority was basically a natural instinct for all living beings. Ambitious individuals would naturally use the bargaining chips that they obtained to become even more powerful. And so, Aso's goal had been realized. It could be said that if it wasn't for the fact that I was a bit of a freak, I meant that I was different from everyone else, I probably would have fallen for Aso's trap. And if it wasn't for the fact that I was so ambitious, which would be unthinkable for an undead emperor, my analysis speed would naturally have been much slower. In that case, the nuclear bomb that Aso had left in the True Symposium really might have been detonated by Aso, which would have prematurely eliminated the greatest threat that the undead emperors were likely to face after invading the Bardi Empire, the human archmages. Right before Aso's death, Aso had completed such a scheme that had a deep understanding of human nature. No matter if he won or lost, he would have benefited from it. Even if he died, his dream would still have been realized. Even though I had raised my opinion of undead Emperor Aso countless times, I still had to admit that I was impressed. I was getting off topic. Looking at it from another angle, killing Aso had truly been a stroke of luck. And Aso's death also meant that the Tark Republic's revival had met with an obstacle. The undead emperors were no idiots. In fact, it was the opposite. Their intelligence was definitely at the peak of the entire universe. They were willing to agree to Aso's invasion because there was a chance of success. Now that the success rate had been greatly reduced, they naturally began to make their own calculations. Everyone's morale was gone. Not only would they be unable to lead the undead emperors, they would also directly disband. Although the undead emperors themselves knew that this would only result in them disbanding and returning home, this seemed to be an acceptable result. At the very least, it was better than gambling everything they had on a gamble with a low chance of success and losing everything. Actually, when I thought about this, I felt that sometimes it was better for people to be a bit more foolish. Many idiots manage to accomplish great feats through sheer willpower that smart people would never be able to accomplish in their entire lives. Meanwhile, many smart people who could have accomplished such feats felt that they were impossible and a waste of their lives and time, so they gave up on the opportunity that should have been theirs. But from a certain standpoint, the undead didn't have much need for the mortal plane, which was the main reason why they lacked fighting spirit. They weren't like the other dimensional invaders who desired more space to live and a better future for their species. Apart from a very small minority, most undead emperors had only returned to their mortal plane for the sake of their former country's glory. They would immediately retreat and start making small calculations at the slightest setback. Cough, cough. I seem to have gotten off topic again. Let's get straight to the point. Aso's unexpected death caused all of the undead emperor's original plans to become nothing more than bubbles. This also caused the undead emperors to all have their own plans for survival. And now, the withered one before me had come looking for me. What do you think of the Tark Republic? Do you want to revive the Tark Republic's civilization? Or do you want the name of your country and the return of the undead senators? This is directly related to the possibility of our future cooperation. Actually, I was just asking the obvious. If it was the latter, Sandro wouldn't have come looking for me at all, nor would he have been surprised and astonished by the sight of the undead and the living coexisting as equals. Sandro wanted civilization and culture to be passed down. But right now, as long as Sandro said this, it would be the same as stating his own goal in the negotiation beforehand. In that case, it would be my turn to casually state a price. Sandro the Withered opened his mouth, but didn't say anything in the end. Just as I was wondering if he was going to force himself or use some new negotiation technique, he suddenly waved his hand, causing that mummy translator to jump out again. Sandro then started panting heavily while clutching his neck. I then understood. Sandro had spoken far too few times, so he didn't even know how to use his vocal tract anymore. He was so agitated that he couldn't speak anymore. In the past, Sandro had probably gotten used to using the soul language to give orders. But for existences like us who were souls themselves, using our souls as we pleased would be a type of provocation and highly dangerous. It would be best to avoid it if possible. What His Majesty desires is for civilization to be passed down. At the very least, he wants the Tark Republic's history and culture to be re-established in this land. Thankfully, this mummy translator was quite eloquent. This was quite a timely addition. I could understand what he was thinking, because this was also Aso's original goal. He had originally intended to forcefully teach the Tark Republic's ancient language to the newborns after the undead took control of Bardi. He would also forcefully promote undead magic, the Tark Republic's history, and other subjects. He would then extend this to politics, philosophy, arts, and other humanities. He would then gradually revive the entire Tark Republic's civilization. For other countries, this would require conquering the Tark Republic. But for us, this wouldn't be difficult at all. The Shilua Empire had both undead and humans living together to begin with. Not only that, the Shilua Empire didn't have any culture or inheritances. Part of his goal would be achieved by bringing in the Shilua Empire. The Mist Alliance had already made the practice of undead magic public and normal. Even the Elven Empire had been revived. It wouldn't be impossible for us to revive the Tark Republic as well. All we needed to do was give up some resources from the Shilua Empire. Compared to the tremendous benefits we would receive, this was nothing. Besides, if the Mist Alliance was able to have the last laugh after the war, there would be plenty of empty land to be had. The Mist Alliance had no conflict or hostility towards the undead, so reviving an undead republic with more living people wouldn't be a problem at all. The Mist Alliance is the only country in Ike that can accept you. You've already seen how popular undead and undead magic are here, but how much you'll receive in the end will depend on how much you pay. We had plenty to offer, but we didn't need to pay much. No matter how I looked at it, this seemed like a business deal worth looking forward to. To be honest, I felt that as long as Sandro was willing to help, it would be worth it. Not mentioning anything else, Sandro was one of the strongest undead emperors in terms of combat strength. Of course, I wouldn't tell him the truth. Reviving an entire country wouldn't be a simple business deal. It would be impossible for us to sign a written agreement this time. The undead emperors were still openly attacking Bardi. If news of this spread, not only would it shake the undead's morale, it would also cause the Mist Alliance to be labeled as colluding with the invaders. At that time, not only would we be isolated internationally, the Holy Church would even have a reason to go on a northern expedition. There are some things that can only be done, not said. Since the Tark Republic intended to revive in the Northlands, they would definitely send over valuable treasures such as personnel, magical information, historical documents, and so on. The Northlands would then prepare space and personnel to receive these resources, as well as arrange for orphans and youths to learn the Tark Republic's greetings. Once the Tark Republic's revival was presented to the undead emperors, it would be a matter of course. If the undead emperors were satisfied with the revival, that would mean that they recognized the new Tark Republic. Anyone who dared to touch the Northlands would be the same as daring to touch the undead emperor's lifeblood. As for what the other undead emperors did, I wouldn't care. The only undead emperor who was willing to ally with me was Sandro. Of course, I absolutely couldn't leave behind any written evidence for this. As for the rumors that might spread, due to information leaking. Well, there were plenty of rumors in this day and age. I could just stubbornly deny everything. Wasn't a mega empire's special privilege to be a professional rogue diplomat? Just saying some empty words to deny some rumors would be far too easy for the Mist Alliance's propagandists and diplomats, as long as there wasn't any concrete evidence. Finally, Sandro opened his eyes. His eyes were completely blank, but his outstretched arm and forced smile were doubtlessly a sign of a deal. Once the undead and the living's right hand clasped together, this shadowy alliance would be completed. Chapter 673. Right after the new year, Sandro silently left the Northlands as well. We discussed many things and came to many agreements that weren't even on paper. It could be said that we had a great time together. During this process, we both reached a tacit agreement to forget about a certain undead emperor who had gone missing. I would never release conservation. Avoiding a deadlock in a negotiation that was destined to be impossible to reach an agreement was a type of technique. According to our agreement, within 2 months, a group of high-level undead would enter the Northlands under the banner of the Shiloh Empire. They would bring with them large amounts of resources, as well as teaching materials that would help train the first human undead mages. As for me, Sandro was indeed a generous trade partner. He wasn't stingy at all when it came to teaching juniors. Both Harlois and I benefited greatly from him. Of course, as a trade, we also paid a certain amount of our research results. Normalization of magic. From a certain standpoint, the reason why undead emperors were so dangerous was because their research results had already surpassed the limits of the creator goddesses. Many seemingly unremarkable things could also be incredibly dangerous as long as one studied them deeply enough. Actually, in the real world, where you would die if you were beheaded. This wasn't a video game world where you wouldn't die as long as you didn't run out of health. Discussing combat strength and level would be a joke. As long as you could pierce an enemy's vitals, a rusted dagger would be no different from a forbidden spell. Sandro's research direction began with the normalization of divine arts, buffs, debuffs, and other enchantments. He first researched why some spells could be effective for a long time, while others would only be effective for an instant. Then, he moved on to how to make a short-term explosive spell be effective for a long time. This was like turning something rotten into something magical. It seemed quite difficult to understand. Then, let's give an example. For example, if I made a fireball into a buff spell, the existence that was buffed would constantly explode with flames, burning everything like the sun, transforming a life form into an energy form, and then into a magical form. That's inconceivable. As for how he accomplished this, he didn't explain it. I believe that it was impossible to explain it either, just like how I was unable to explain how I created the 7 original sins with words. Ignoring the process and only talking about the result, the final result was that he gave up his physical body and turned into magic. His entire body was a spell, ultimate withering. The withering spell was a 7th circle necromancy spell. It was not very powerful, but it was extremely destructive to living beings. The principle of the spell was to extract all the water in a certain environment and make them wither and die. The spell was very destructive to living beings, but not to the undead. Of course, with Sandro's power, he could also turn bones into powder. The undead would not be able to withstand it. As for Sandro's physical body, beneath his decaying body, there was a withering spell that was becoming more and more intense. This spell was perpetually evolving. Previously, the fairies had said that Sandro had instantly cast out a forbidden spell, but in reality, he had simply removed his disguise and transformed into a withering spell that could cover the entire plains, forcibly blocking the enemy's forbidden spell and greatly injuring the ordinary warriors. In the undead world, this wasn't any big secret. As long as Sandro had attacked before, it would naturally spread. This was also the reason why he was nicknamed the Witherer and Lord of Withering. This was also how Sandro had broken through the limits of an undead's natural physical body and soul to become an undead emperor. He had already transformed into magic. What else could possibly restrict him? From a certain standpoint, he was no longer an undead. In fact, it could even be said that he didn't belong to any species at all. I had long since learned this information from Aso. This was also why I said that Sandro was more dangerous than 10 conservation combined. Other forbidden spell mages would have various restrictions when using forbidden spells. Casting a forbidden spell would cause them to enter a long period of decline. However, Sandro was able to instantly transform into a forbidden spell without any restrictions. If he really gave up on everything and started to destroy the living, that would be an unstoppable calamity. The price to pay was that Sandro, who had transformed into magic, was no longer able to use normal undead magic. However, this restriction was incomparable to the destructive power of his forbidden spell transformation. Sandro was a strategic weapon of destruction. He didn't attack, but the moment he attacked, he would furiously create no man's land and change the entire world's map. It should be mentioned that any area that was swept over by Sandro's map attack would be destroyed. The soil, plants, and animals would all be destroyed. The soil would lose all moisture and turn into deserts. The undead would also be reduced to bone dust within Sandro's domain. Neither enemy nor ally would be able to survive. Sandro would obtain an entire undead plane. This was a power that could only be used for destruction. Sandro was unable to create anything, but he could destroy everything. Sandro didn't have any so-called myth-ranked weapons. Or, to put another way, he himself was a myth-ranked weapon. Not only that, Sandro himself was a form of magic. That meant that apart from dispelling that frightening, forbidden spell, there was no way to destroy it. Sandro was an eternal existence that no one would be able to deal with. The other undead emperors were also quite dangerous. However, from Aso's memories, he unhesitatingly viewed Sandro as the most dangerous existence of all. Even in the immemorial divine wars, no god had been able to make Sandro submit. This was why I had previously said that just obtaining Sandro's combat strength would be more than enough. Even in a divine war, Sandro would still be an excellent card. Perhaps Sandro wouldn't be able to destroy a main god by himself. However, he would be able to destroy everything that a main god possessed, while the main gods would be unable to kill him. Actually, main gods were only an evaluation to begin with. They were existences capable of easily suppressing powerful gods. An ancient existence like Sandro had long since been forgotten by history. There was no main god's evaluation of him at all. However, not a single main god would say that they could easily defeat Sandro. But judging from his defeats in the immemorial divine wars, Sandro also had a natural enemy. And his natural enemy was in his enemy's faction. This was why Sandro didn't dare to do as he pleased. Let's not talk about this for now. Sandro generously gave us many of his research results. Many of these results were far too advanced for me, so I needed more time to absorb them. Harloise, on the other hand, benefited greatly as she communicated with Sandro. In return, I also gave him a new discovery. Although it was only a low-level, first-circle magic spell, in a way, this discovery could change the entire world of undead magic. Mana Bone Creation, a first-circle undead magic spell. It would consume a certain amount of mana to create some bones that could be used to cast undead magic. Alright then, some people could probably tell that this wasn't my invention at all. It was Undead Emperor Conservation's personal discovery. At the time, I forced her to her limits, making it so that she didn't have any resources to create new cannon fodder. She forcefully created something from nothing, using her endless mana to create an undead giant as her trump card in the final battle. In the end, after she was defeated, the results of her research naturally fell into my hands. Not only that, I complained about how wasteful she was. This was a spell with the potential to change the world, yet she used it as her personal trump card. That was far too wasteful. Cultivating undead magic required resources. Corpses and flesh weren't something that could just be obtained by the wind. Although it was now quite easy to obtain corpses due to the many years of war, these were still the accumulation of resources from the past. As more and more undead magic cultivators appeared, there would naturally be more and more tomb robbers. At that time, many problems would arise. Not to mention, The promotion of undead magic was no longer something that only undead mages could do. The development of new magical engineering technology brought about great developments with each passing day. No matter how the technology developed, it was only natural that the more spellcasters were the source of magic, the better. Compared to other types of magic cultivation, the cost of cultivating undead magic was low, and the requirement for talent was low. Even if an undead acolyte didn't have the ability or talent to become an official mage, just selling magic and selling zombie labor would be enough to support themselves. Actually, portable death mana batteries were becoming more and more popular in the market due to their low price. Making all mages, even if it was just undead magic, would obviously improve the entire magical engineering civilization. However, the problem of resources had been brought up multiple times by others. Magical bone creation was essentially no different from using magic to create ice or earth. Both involved the conversion of magic and the elements. I felt that the successful research on bone creation was directly related to the fact that the power of death had become one of the 4 major elemental powers. Otherwise, the previous undead mages wouldn't have missed out on such an important technology. For conservation, who lived in the ice plane, and for an undead emperor who was already at the top of the undead plane, such an accidental invention probably wouldn't mean much to her. After all, she could easily summon countless undead as cannon fodder. However, this was an incredibly important foundation for the entire undead magic system. This, as expected of the only undead ruler in the past 3,000 years. Amazing, truly amazing. Sandro was rather frightening when he opened his eyes. However, his words were filled with genuine joy. I felt rather embarrassed, but I wouldn't tell him that conservation was the one who invented the undead Emperor Carwins. That would also bring up a topic that we had intentionally ignored, the missing undead emperor. Conservation had now become Yongya City's limitless mana source. With her as the core, an undead magical engineering factory was currently being constructed. This was a core project that was directly related to my personal power development. How could I possibly stop? Ahem, let's not talk about such things. At the very least, Sandro had left with a satisfied expression. We had also obtained quite a lot of benefits. Harlois was now one step closer to becoming an undead emperor. I also had many new ideas about the magic sword that represented death. Old antique Harlois was quite knowledgeable. Since we were all working together, he wouldn't be stingy. All of our questions were answered. His experience and knowledge that had been tested by the passage of time had greatly benefited us. At our current level, it was already quite rare for someone to be able to point us in the right direction. If we accidentally took the wrong path, it was possible that we wouldn't be able to return for several years, several decades, or even several centuries. As conservation's knowledge system was gradually revealed and Aso's knowledge system was unlocked, a tremendous amount of undead knowledge was being accumulated for me. Harlois, Aso, conservation, Sandro, and myself. All 5 undead emperor's knowledge systems were placed before me. It was likely that my power system would become unbalanced. My knowledge in other areas would be far inferior to that of undead magic. But if I had something to eat, would I really spit it out? Getting back to the main topic. I felt like I could do something now that all the undead secrets were placed before me. Perhaps I would be able to give everyone a fright. You should first obtain a myth-ranked weapon and become a semi-god. The 4 magic swords are quite ambitious, but none of them have matured yet. Be careful not to meet a powerful enemy that will directly kill you. Also, I can't wait any longer. Isn't it because it's too difficult? You can't wait any longer? Do you think you can break through? Have you found a method to break through? Harlois' words surprised me for a moment, but then I was delighted. A magical pet's power level couldn't possibly surpass its master's. Since she felt like she couldn't wait any longer and felt like it was time to break through, that would be a tremendous difference in power level. I can give it a try. I'm about 50 to 60% confident in breaking through. Also, thanks for your contribution. I was rather astonished by Harlois' words. Other breakthroughs could be accomplished by taking medicine or studying secret techniques, but undead emperors were the equivalent of breaking through the limits of the creator goddesses. They would be creating their own path. How could they possibly rely on external help? With so many undead emperors' paths before me, not counting the amount of knowledge I've accumulated, this half-living, half-dead body of mine has indeed been a great help to me. For once, the silly cat wasn't acting all tsundere. She seemed to be sighing. Now that she mentioned it, going back and forth between life and death several times was indeed very helpful in understanding the power of death. All right, I'll try to break through as quickly as possible. At the very least, I'm quite satisfied with my ice magic sword's progress. The back of my building was now filled with all sorts of ice sculptures and snow sketches. These weren't materials for my ice magic sword. Rather, they were tools that I used to deepen my impression and memories of the Northlands. As an extension of the ice traveler, I would likely need to recall many past memories and calamities in order to create my ice magic sword in the Northlands. But sometimes, when you recalled past misfortunes and calamities and thought how wonderful your current life was, a new calamity would arrive. After the new year, all the administrative departments resumed their operations after a short rest. However, the news that arrived wasn't all good. How could the Northland's natural calamities not mention the beast stampede that would arrive every year? The Winter Hunt squad was ambushed by a beast stampede. How were the losses? Sandro's visit caused me to put down all the trivial matters on my hands. I also handed over the Winter Hunt to Renee and the others. What made me feel sad was that Kelly didn't let me off the hook. She still deducted my allowance like she said before. Cough, cough. I never expected that the Mist Kingdom would actually suffer losses during the Winter Hunt, even with their current military strength. The Beast Stampede was much smaller than expected. We didn't suffer many losses. However, Her Highness Renee felt that something was wrong with the situation. This is a letter she personally wrote to you. The messenger left after handing me the letter. I carefully read the letter. Renee's words were quite simple and direct. There was indeed something wrong with the Beast Stampede. The Beast Stampede was less than 1/3 of the expected size, yet it unhesitatingly attacked the human army. Beasts were intelligent as well. They would go around the fully armed Iron Army in search of weak prey to fill their stomachs, such as attacking villages. That was why, as long as the beasts had an obvious advantage in numbers, they probably wouldn't actively attack the human army. But now, not only did the beasts attack, they even ran away. Not only that, they didn't run fast enough. They didn't even enter deep into the mountains. This scene caused both Renee and I to think of guerrilla warfare and kiting tactics. It was obvious that we were trying to stall for time. I couldn't help but think of those twisted noodle demons. They were definitely behind this. But just what was their goal? Were they hoping that the Beast Stampede would be able to threaten the Northland's Mist Alliance? The Beast Stampede's numbers had decreased, but I didn't think that was a good thing. Droll had long since come to the conclusion that due to the elemental tide's increase, a large number of wild beasts would transform into magical beasts, and magical beasts would become even more difficult to deal with in the Beast Stampede. Not only would magical beasts have stronger reproductive abilities, their strength and appetite would also increase, which would make these magical beasts hungry enough to hunt for food. Their numbers should have greatly increased. Renee's prediction? She had made her prediction based on last year's Beast Stampede's numbers. Meanwhile, my prediction for the Beast Stampede was at least twice as many as last year's. That meant that more than 80% of the Beast Stampede had disappeared, while the remaining Beast Stampede was trying to stall the Mist Kingdom's winter hunting teams. Who would believe that there was no scheme behind this? Just where did the Beast Stampede go? Where else could it go? If it's not in the Mist Kingdom, it's naturally in another country. The other countries in the Northlands will have some fun to watch. Harloise, don't be so direct. Didn't you notice that I was intentionally ignoring this possibility? If your dog bites someone else's dog, you'll have to take responsibility for it. Can't you just deny it? It's not like this is the first time you've done something like this. Good idea. I'll immediately reply to Renee. Elven Empress Harloise has a suggestion. Silly cat, don't bite me on the head. Do you still want to be an undead emperor or not?